celebrating 350.
Vampire Survivors is coming to PS5 this summer.
Hello and welcome to Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and bad news, everyone. Saul cannot be here today as he was planned to. Of course, the day changed in a couple of weird ways, but Saul did have something pop up that kept him from being able to join us. We are actually starting a little later because my own family had a emergency that I had to help with. So all things being considered, while we are celebrating 350 episodes and while Saul is a very large part of this show and has always been and will always be, he was not able to be here today. So he sent his apologies. He knew that some people were wanting to hear from him. Stuff came up. So now that that's out of the way, I am joined by who I have been joined by every week for quite a long time now, Chris Figs. Chris, how you doing, bud?
Oh, just wonderful, Brett. How are you?
I'm doing all right, man. All things considered, I'm here. My family emergency was not my health, so I'm rocking it solid. That sounds bad. Other than that, I'm doing all right. So we're going to get into a couple things today. Of course, we did kind of prepare a slightly different show in hopes that Saul would be here. So we're going to fill in some of the gaps. We wanted to leave an episode or leave some room in the episode for Saul to be able to kind of come in and answer some questions aimed towards him. As a result of that, a lot of the questions that were aimed a little more toward him, I think we're going to refrain from. Hopefully we can get him in sometime soon and we can pull those questions back around. But with that being said, we're going to end up talking about the community's stance on the Stellar Blade controversy and how it kind of brushes up against this idea we hear of a lot in games. And that idea is of the idea of false advertisement, which does have some very successful cases in the gaming industry. So we'll do with that what we can. With that in mind, we're also going to talk about Housemarque spinning up some wild speculation before letting everyone down with still cool, but a little bit of a gentle knock on something revolving around Returnal and some Xbox stuff that are going out where rumors have stirred up once again that they will become a third-party publisher, which they are, at least currently, not so sure they want to give into. We'll talk about all that here in a bit. There's also some news from some of these old games like Lost Soul Side that have been kind of floating around the internet for a while Bloober Team talking a little bit more about Silent Hill 2 and what it means for them, and some wording around The Wolf Among Us 2 kind of popping up. But we'll talk about all that in a bit. Chris, what we always start this show off with, as you may know, and a lot of our listeners may know, is what we've been playing this week or throughout the past week, so that we can give you guys an idea of what we might think that you like, or you can just at least hear our thoughts and see if it sounds like it gels with you, or maybe push you away from a game that you thought you had interest in, but after hearing us talk about it, just doesn't sound up your alley. Chris, start us off, man. What you been playing this week?
So I guess the game I've been playing the most of this week is the good old Dave the Diver. I'm still diving deep into that blue sea. It's great. It's funny because some of the stuff I complained about last week was rectified almost immediately by some of the stuff that happens in the game. You know, like I can now fast travel down to the deepest part that I've gotten to so far. But yeah, the game has opened up in a lot of cool ways. There's, a new branch of Bancho sushi and stuff like that. So it's gotten pretty extensive. I think chapter 6 is where I'm at, if anyone's played it. I'm
it's interesting. I wouldn't have considered that a chapter game, but I guess that there's a pretty makes sense.
Yeah, there's a pretty big story in it. That's basically how it moves forward. But yeah, it's really great. I hope you do give it a shot sometime, because even if you don't finish it, I want to hear what you have to say about some of the animations that play when you do certain things with characters.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. It's a game that I definitely hope to get to, but I've started enough games, and I don't do well juggling games. So it's a game that's definitely just somewhere on the back burner. And that's all right. No problem with that at all. I'm glad to get around to it whenever I have a good time. And that is a game that I can see myself because I already have it downloaded. That's a perfect game for when I'm between games. and nothing is really evident of what I want to play, that's the perfect kind of game, because it's one that you can get up and going in pretty quickly is what it looks like. Whereas, some games like Dragon's Dogma 2 was like, it's a commitment to start, because like you have to play so much of it to even kind of get a grasp on the game. Whereas something like, Balatro or Dave the Diver or some of these smaller indie games are very easy to pick up, very quickly start putting some time in, get a grasp of what the game is and how you feel about it. And then you can come back to it without much of an issue. So it's a game I'm excited for.
Nice.
Yeah, it's funny. A few things that you said last week, like you were talking about, Velvet messaged me and was saying, hey, don't be put off by what Chris said about Dave the Diver. And of course I wasn't, because I knew what you were getting at. You love the game, but sometimes when you sit there and you just hyper focus on something because you love it, you also start noticing some of the flaws that you wouldn't have noticed if you weren't playing it in this very odd, specific, I'm doing this or this kind of way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but
so
I also think
it's funny because like this week you're already like, no, that's all cool.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, I've been praising the game significantly longer than I've had any complaints about it. So I feel like it's definitely a game to give a shot.
Well, I think that's the problem around discourse around gaming, though. It's like there are times where games that you even like just don't hit for you, and you feel it, and you can even express in words what it is. That doesn't mean it's always going to be that for you. It's just kind of the nature of enjoying things. There's nothing like having a hobby or having something that you like and being like, I do like this, but right now I'm just not feeling it. And a good example of that is like, I love Yu-Gi-Oh! I have not really been feeling Yu-Gi-Oh! Whenever we've been playing it. I haven't even bothered. I have a deck that's like half built that's been sitting in a half built state for like a month. It doesn't help with the fact that I'm far more invested in our game, and I'm more passionate about that right now and trying to learn from that. So I'm wanting to play that. But even whenever I've played Digimon lately, because we kind of got back around into that, Digimon's super fun. It's like, I just need a rest from Yu-Gi-Oh! Even though I love it.
Yeah. No,
I need
for
some time away from it to make me appreciate it,
It's Dave the Diver is a game where everything, there's a lot of mechanics that go through the game that are fun, but after doing them 100 times, especially when it's just like Stardew Valley, where it's like I love Stardew Valley, one of my favorite games of all time, but pressing square when you have one of those gigantic fucking farms gets boring. The whole point is the automation of it. So, now that I have more automation, like I can pay MC Sammy to do my farm and stuff like that, it makes it a lot more convenient to play. But yeah, so that's my time with Dave the Diver. I like Dave the Diver. Like, you should play it. I'm gonna keep going. I want that platinum. Be a nice one to have.
Yeah, I mean, is it a difficult platinum, or because like get back to games that it's no surprise for anybody. I've been playing the hell out of Balatro. Mm-hmm. That is an insane trophy list.
Yeah, you should do it.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not against doing it.
Yeah,
but that's like I will either do it and play nothing else and then hate the game when I'm done, or I can do it naturally throughout the year as I play Balatro as like an in-between game.
That's very true. That's very true. I mean, I don't think Dave the Diver's hard. For me, it's been time consuming. I think I have 50 hours in it so far. So it's been a long game. That's part of where my fatigue was coming from last week. I've played a lot of this game because I like it. So yeah, I don't know. I recommend it. I think you should give it a shot. I think you should go for the Balatro trophies, because I'd love to do that one too. It's like Slay the Spire, where like I desperately want to get that platinum, but it's just so. Whew, I don't know even how.
Yeah.
Once I run Ascension 20, I'll go for it. But my highest is Ascension 14. Like, I still got a ways to go on that front. So.
Well, you seem like you're kind of hitting the point where I was, where when I was first looking at the trophy list, despite absolutely adoring Balatro, I was like, I don't even see a way towards hitting a hand of 1 million, and thinking that was crazy. And then there's one for 100 million or 10 billion, 10 million.
It's 100 million, I believe.
I thought it was 100 million. Anyway, so you look at that and you're like, dude, this is insane. And it's like, how am I ever going to get there? But that one night where I sent you the crazy run that I'd set up, where I was hitting 1.68 million hands, I was, as soon as I got the trophy, when I could feel myself trending towards getting close to hitting the million, I was like, maybe I can do this.
Yeah. Is this just the time to talk about Balatro? Because it's not on my list, but I have played Balatro this week.
Dude, screw it. Let's talk about Balatro.
Let's talk about Balatro.
It's because it's the type of game that's so easy to fall into, and it is so shallow to understand, but so deep with opportunity that it's insane. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I finally beat my first run. After the episode last week, I did get that win. Thank you, sir. It was cool. It was cool in that run, especially discovering things. Like I messaged you because we've been talking back and forth about the game, and I was like, play order very much does matter on Jokers, depending on the Joker, because I had 2 Jokers that multiplied my multiplier, and then I had cards that added to my base multiplier, right? So by moving it, the one that adds to my base multiplier was in front, that one gave me like a 30 times multiplier, and then it was 30 times 3.25 times 3.5. So my multiplier was just flying up, and that was pretty nice.
Well, it's funny because I'm glad you sent that when you did, because that was before I ended up having that run where I got the banana. Yeah. And the banana Joker, the Gross Michael, whatever the fuck it's called.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking I saw it plenty of runs, but I remember thinking, why would you want something that's times 15 multiplier but has a 1 in 4 chance to break? But I remember being like, there has to be a trick to this, because it's the same way I felt about the voucher that you can buy that's blank. I was like, I should buy this every time it comes up, because there has to be something going on. And so I did. And of course, I ended up unlocking a new voucher from buying it 10 times that allows you to have an extra Joker slot, which is sick.
Yeah.
So whenever I was going through all that, I was like, okay, fuck it. I'm buying the banana. And that was the run where I hit the million hand, because I thought, well, what's the worst that could happen? Like, I'll just buy the banana. If it breaks, it breaks. And if I don't get anything, it's fine. And so it broke the first round I used it. And I was like, of course. I was like, of course, that's super funny. But then it took me to the store, and there was a buffoon pack where you can get the Jokers out of. And I was like, okay, I'm missing a Joker now. I have a Joker slot, so I'm going to see what it is. And I popped it, and as soon as I got it, it was the Cavendish, which is what unlocks as a possibility in a run after you buy and break the banana. You have a chance of getting the Cavendish, which gives you times 3 multiplier. I can't remember. It was something like really simple. And it was something so crazy, and it was probably better than that, but it had a 1 in 1,000 chance of breaking.
Yeah.
So it ended up being that thing where you told me at the right time, and I was like, oh, okay, I need to put this at the end because it's times 3 multiplier. And then I ended up getting that other card where per hand played or whatever it was. I think it was per planet played.
Per planet you used,
yeah. You get a multiplier, and that's what is hard to, because I had to explain that to my buddy this weekend. He came over and I was playing and he was, and I was like, hey, that card, you see how it says X3 multi? And he's like, oh yeah, it's just like +3. I was like, no. It's times your multiplier. And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, dude, I used it the other day, and I would have like a multiplier of like 600. And then that multiplier turned into like, I think my highest multiplier I got was like 5,000 or something. And it's like, that's sick.
Yeah, it is.
So I've been having a blast with the game. It's something easy to pick up, and I can put it down super easily too. And I've beat a run with the red deck, the blue deck. I'm working on the green deck right now. I've got the yellow deck done. I've beat it with a seeded run that I didn't realize when you do a seeded run, it just doesn't count. And that makes sense. But I beat it with the Hex deck on a seeded run, and I've beat it with the Zodiac deck legitimately as well. So, and I've beat on yellow deck, I've beat the red stake, which is the second stake, and I've gotten pretty far into the green stake.
Damn,
and those are difficult.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah, because red stake stipulates that you don't get any kind of cash reward for the first blind, the small blind.
Oh, wow.
And then green stacks. So every one of the whatever you want to call it, I just said the word, but every one of the difficulties says that the previous one's debuffs come into play too. So green is you make no money like just like on the red on your first small blind, or on these small blinds of any given round, but also the round starts scaling up a lot quicker. So where you would normally be ante 8 before you see like 250,000, you'll start seeing that like ante 5.
Oh no.
Yeah. And
See,
so you've got to make really specific plays on what jokers you're doing. You got to try and build up your thing quick.
Yeah, that's what's so great about the game, is that it's such a strategic thing that you have to be doing math for this entire game, but like not because there's like the game math and then there's the game minutia math, and you don't have to do the minutia math, but you have to do the game math. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The game math is hard really, sometimes.
I find it interesting because sometimes I've noticed that most of the time the runs I know I'm going to win, I know pretty early on. I know by like ante 3 or ante 4 that I've got the combo that will get me there if I don't be stupid.
Right.
And it's been really interesting to see how that plays out, because there was one run where I just had my multiplier set up right, where even though ideally I should have been playing straights, there was a few times where I couldn't set a straight up and I was out of discards. And the best thing for me to do was just play high card. And even with high card, I was winning rounds.
No shit.
Yeah. And that was I think that was the run I won for the blue deck. And it was really interesting. So you start learning how important straights are too, because my first win ever was based off of 2-pair. And
which is crazy to me.
And you remember the night that I had the Gross Michael and was going crazy, I was doing 2-pair, but my 2-pair was level.
You said like 12 or 13 or something like that?
No. It was like level 30 something by the time because once I won the run, you can go into endless mode, and that's when I hit ante 11. And ante 11,
it's a lot.
Small blind was 8.5 million.
Okay.
And I failed. I got to 7.1.
That seems about right. Wow.
Yeah.
No, but I don't know. I just find all that interplay really fun. I had that same planet card because that's the one that I discovered. That's how I beat my first run. And it was so fun because I would just buy every planet I could find. And so by the time I got into endless mode, everything was at like plus 10. So even, it was cool. I didn't get as high as you did, but the pairs and stuff, even the small ones were crushing. I'm like, this is awesome. You're like 50 off a 2 card. It's like, all right, cool.
Mm-hmm. What's funny is that you get that. It's not surprising, but it's just always entertaining to watch somebody who's getting into the game, sinking into it, but then getting frustrated with the fact they haven't won a run yet. They're like, why can't I win? And then watching, once they do, how much it doubles you down into the game, because you're like, oh yeah, I can do this. And then you keep chasing that high of winning over, okay, I'm going to do it again. I can do it again. I remember as soon as I beat that first yellow, I was like, oh, I'm going for the red stake. I got to try this. And then I got to the green stake, and green is hard, dude. I fail almost every time in ante 5 because it starts scaling up so quick, and I haven't had good enough RNG on my jokers.
So are you finding that skipping blinds is not good? Because it's funny. I skip depending on it, but
I don't think it's good very often. There are a few times where I do it. Like, okay, the last whenever I won for the blue deck, I skipped twice. Both times it was a small blind, and it was because the amount of money that I was going to get from the small blind was not going to be worth it. And whatever I was getting really was worth it enough, because I had 3. So basically on that run, I had 8 joker slots because I had 3 negative jokers.
Yeah.
And so my thought process was, the reason I skipped is because I had 2 negative jokers, and the tag was next base edition joker is negative. And I was like, I don't even care what the joker is. I'm skipping.
Yeah, I want it.
And it ended up being a great one. I can't remember what it was right now, but it was a great one. It was the die one that doubles all probabilities.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So that was awesome. And I ended up having 3 of them that were negative. And so I've run into a thing where my buddy was like, well, I'll try and skip them. And yeah, there's times where you might want to. Like, one of the skips I've done before is like, it was going to give me $15 after beating the boss blind. And I'm like, yeah, I won't make $15 and I need that too much. But it's weird how that game works too, because I've just started trying different jokers to see what I can do. So there's a joker it's like a credit card, and it allows you to go $20 in debt. And so I did that. And I coupled it with a joker that if you play a hand with less than $3, it creates a tarot card.
Yeah.
And so I kept doing that, and I got like 22 tarot cards from it. And I found another joker that gets a plus multiplier for every tarot card used. So it was at like plus 30 or something by the time that I was nearing the end of that run. And I ended up eventually getting to the point where I could sell the credit card because I got to where I had a good enough state that I didn't need to spend money unless it was something obviously good, which was hard because it's like I'd start getting out of the debt and then I'd be like, oh, I have to buy this joker because you can't guarantee you'll get it in the next store. So you buy it, you go back down in debt a little bit and you're like, damn, okay, I'll work my way out of this eventually. And I did. But it was
so what happens if you go in debt? Because I've never used that card. I never wanted to use it.
Nothing. Your dollar sign just goes negative and it can go negative to 20.
Okay, interesting.
But if you sell that joker while you're in the negative, you can't do anything until you're in the positive. As long as you have that card, if you get up to negative 12 and there's an $8 joker there that you really need, you can still buy it. It just pushes you back to negative 20.
Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah. And I did that with the blue deck because, the yellow deck gives you that $14 start.
Yeah.
Which is really good. People don't realize how much starting with $14 is a huge help.
Yeah, I can imagine. I usually skip the first blinds, but yeah, I'm excited to play more of Balatro.
Yeah.
It's a great game.
That's good. All right, what else have we been playing?
Oof. So the first big one is Fallout 4 PS5.
Have you had a crash yet?
Hundreds. Yeah, it's Fallout 4. What are you expecting? I don't know. It's just part of the game, bro.
It's Cyberpunk, bro. What are you expecting?
Yeah. I knew what I was getting into. It's a Bethesda game. But this is fun because I'm playing this run in a way I've never played Fallout before. And I'm almost scared to get too far because if I hate it, you know what I mean? But I'm playing a 10 strength, 10 luck, 1/1/1/1 character. And I'm only using fists. So it's been super interesting. It's hard. It's a very hard run so far. I've had this thing where I got stuck in like this industrial plant and I was inside, but every time I went outside there were turrets and I just couldn't do anything. So I just sprinted by everything and that worked fine. But yeah, it's a super interesting run to be doing.
Yeah. The thing about that game is I've always wanted to be able to do the idiot run, and it just doesn't really work with the game the way that it is. And that's such a dumb thing, realistically, right? But I really enjoy that in New Vegas specifically because New Vegas really leans into the fact that you can be a dumbass.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite parts of the game. So I don't always play an idiot character when I've played New Vegas, but I've done a full run through New Vegas where I'm a fucking dunce and I just stay one the whole game. And it's funny. Really funny because it's kind of like what we've been seeing. One of the games I've been playing, so I guess we'll go back and forth on it. I ended up picking up Baldur's Gate 3 again because my buddy Donovan, who I was playing with originally, he moved back here and we hung out Saturday night and we were kind of like, man, what do I have that's co-op on my system? And we were kind of going through and he's like, Baldur's Gate 3 is split screen. I was like, that's a good point. So we tried it and we ended up picking up on a run that we haven't played on in 4 months. And it was funny because like it was a little frustrating because we're coming into the game without fully remembering how to play it and whatnot.
Yeah.
But very quickly it was fun. And then we started playing again the other night and it was kind of this thing where it was like, I forget how cool this game is at times because it's just like we were trying to figure out a way to get through an area in the Underdark or whatever it's called, Underdark, one of those two.
Underdark.
Yeah, and it was a combat that we had tried a few times and kept failing on because we were level 4 initially. But we went and did some stuff, got level 5, and we were going to go back to it. But we thought, before we go to it, we need to sleep so that we'll get all of our spells back because we're going to need them.
Yeah.
So we return to camp, we rest, we return the next day, and when we get there, everything that we were trying to fight was gone. The thing that was blocking our way was busted open, and the guy that we were going to have to try and do something with one way or the other was dead. And so we just didn't have to fight at all. And we were like, oh, okay. We found a hidden boss that's at a forge that was really cool. That had a really weird boss mechanic that was cool to play around with.
Oh,
so
yeah,
there was
I know
just
what boss you're talking about. It's a good boss.
Yeah, it's sweet boss. It was really cool to find. So with all that in mind, I've been really enjoying Baldur's Gate 3 because of the fact that I'm often surprised at how in-depth a lot of the things come about with dialogue decisions based off of what you are, what your class is. You know, am I a wizard? I have a specific wizard response with another wizard. And it's cool because it gives a little more insight into the world, insight into the character. And then, of course, just having, you know, different things come up because, I can speak to an animal. Yeah. So whenever I'm talking to an animal and that interaction happens with me, I can be more insightful.
I hope you do a Dark Urge playthrough one day.
Yeah, I should.
You really should, because that's like, it's a different game. And from what I remember, they said that was what they originally wanted the game to be. Like, that was the story, but they didn't think most people would want to play it that way, so they didn't do it. So it's really cool. I would go that route. But yeah, the last thing I'll talk about is I have a PlayStation Portal now. So this one did not get run over.
I saw you pull that out of the box.
I did, yeah. I was gonna show it off, and then I'm like, wait, I can't actually use this. It was funny though. There's some cool stuff on that. It's not like, I know I'm playing my console, but it feels like a handheld. You know, like, I know that sounds obvious, but like, there are certain games where I'm like, this is a handheld game for me, and I want to play it here. You know, like I finally put Persona 3 back in because I'm like, I'm just gonna play Persona 3 in bed. That's a great handheld game for like an hour. I'll do a day and then pass out.
It's funny because I get what you're saying, but I have had the wondering of what that actually feels like in person, because you're right. The intuition should be that it feels like you're playing a handheld, but there's a difference between feeling like you're playing a console game that you're streaming to a device that fits in your hands versus playing something that feels like you're playing the game locally on the device. And I'm imagining that's what you're trying to get at, right? That it somehow succeeds at feeling like you're actually playing Persona 3 on it and not your PlayStation 5.
It does, yeah. But it succeeds in that because I have my PS5 hardwired, so it's 100% perfect. Like, it doesn't lag
that's
at
the other
all.
question, because that's a lot of it, right? And I can't get a hardwire to my PlayStation 5 right now. So even though I don't necessarily know that I would use it, I debated toying around with it because I think it's an interesting idea, and I almost got one. But A, they're really hard to find, so my impulsivity can't take control. And secondarily, I kept being like, would I have that same experience? Or would I just regret spending the $200, you know?
Well, I think it's one of those things where the few times you do use it, it's worth it, you know? I don't think it's a device you should be looking at as like, oh, this is my daily driver gaming thing. But like, I just decided the other day, I'm like, fuck it, I want to lay in bed, put on Fallout and play on my, on my handheld. And it worked. Like, it was just a pretty flawless experience. The one thing I was disappointed on, because I wanted to do like a YouTuber bait kind of thing, where I wanted to stream Fallout New Vegas to my Steam Deck over Wi-Fi and beat it that way. But sadly, you cannot remote play, or you cannot stream through remote play. So that did not work, which was disappointing. Which is interesting, right? Because if I'm just using my PS5 and it's just sending me an image, you'd think it would work. But
I guess it's that problem of like double stacking your latency. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's probably what it is. It's like, well, you're already streaming to your PS5, which does introduce a chance to cause latency, and then you're streaming it from your PS5 to another thing, which introduces more latency, and you're gonna feel the latency more than you would have, because one's coming from server side. Like, I think the reason that the Portal works pretty well is that you're using it in a self-contained environment.
Yeah.
But when you're streaming from a server, you're having to deal with how close are you to that server. And your latency and all those things are very dependent on how close to a server house you are.
No, I mean, for sure. I know, like, there's practical reasons it doesn't work, but it's just one of those things where I wanted to do it. I wanted to see how brutal that game would get. Like, where I was when I platinumed it, like, is it going to run at 1 FPS, or is it even going to load? I thought it would be interesting. But yeah, the PlayStation Portal is awesome. I'm looking forward to continuing to use it. It's great just to lounge around, throw it on.
Yeah, that's awesome. I still think, did UPS or whoever end up ever paying for it, or did they just say nah?
They never even called me back. I sent them a bunch of, but they were never going to. This is like the delusion my parents had. They were like, "Oh, you got to call them again." I'm like, they're not. I'm not trying to be a dick, as my dad feels bad, but I'm like, you ran it over. Like, they're not going to pay for that.
Yeah, like, it's like you did that.
You did that. Like, I get that it was put in a bad spot, but you ran it over. They didn't. Like, what are they going to pay for? Like, I knew that.
Yeah. It's a little different. If they ran it over and they were still like, it ain't our fault. They'd be like,
exactly.
Hey, fuck you, guy.
It's like, yeah. I wasn't home. I couldn't talk to my parents, but they did send a delivered thing. Like, they did everything they had to do, except put it in a place where reasonable people would put a package. You know? Like, that's all they didn't do.
That's the problem, is I see both sides. I do think they're at fault, but I do think your dad's at fault. So it's like,
they're at
people
fault,
don't tend to offer payment for something when you can reasonably find fault on both sides.
Well, that's the thing, right? If I walk out of a grocery store with a gallon of milk and trip over the doorstep, they're not going to give me a new gallon of milk. I'm just going to have to buy another one. So,
very good point. Well, that's how it goes. I'm glad you got one. I'm glad it seems to be working out pretty well for you. All right, you got one more game on your list here, and it kind of surprised me because I'm trying to remember if this game got a PS5 version, or if your class, or PS4 or PS5 version, or if I'm remembering that Dead Island 2, is that a PS3 game?
Nope. Dead Island 2 came out last year.
Oh, yeah, that's right. What am I thinking of then?
You're thinking of Dead Island Riptide.
Riptide. That's exactly what I'm thinking of. All right, so Dead Island 2, the game that I remember actually being quite iffy on because it took an entire console generation to come out. Yeah. So, what's your thoughts on it? I mean, were you a big fan of the original? First of all, did you play the original?
I did play it, yeah. I was a fan enough of it. The original is one of those games where it's like, oh, this is great for its time, and then the next generation, Dying Light, comes out, and you're like, oh, wow, this is so much worse than Dying Light. But I think that
isn't Dying Light's stick that it's the team who did
it's the same guys,
the original Dead Island.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just moved on.
Yeah, and they just moved on, made the same game. But so far Dead Island 2 is fun. It's not open world, it's like hubs, which I think are pretty cool. Okay. Some of them are pretty small. So
I don't hate that. Yeah.
No, I think it's neat. I've been looking at it for a while, and I had the stars points, and I'm just like, fuck it. I'll just pay $20 and play this. So I'm giving it a shot. It's pretty good. So we'll see how much time I put into it. Like I said, I've got Dave the Diver, Fallout, Persona, Dead Island 2.
Balatro.
I turned on Stellar Blade. And
there you go. I'm proud of you.
Fine. I think it's good. I think it's cool.
Yeah.
There's some cool stuff, like when I don't remember the girl's name at the beginning. The other one, I know it's Eve, and then there's Talkman or something like that.
Yeah.
But they have that scene where they throw the medical device, and it's just that super, like, I just thought that scene was cool. But yeah, I don't know. It wasn't as much of Sekiro as I felt it was. I was hoping it was going to be.
No, it's borrowing plenty from Souls-like design, but it's also, and Sekiro, but it's also very specifically, because that's actually the other game I've been playing alongside Balatro and Baldur's Gate 3. It is weird because it borrows all the things that people tend to like about Souls-like while choosing to check at the door all the things that people tend to have issues with. So you die and you restart at your checkpoint, which is essentially your bonfire, right? But you don't lose any kind of currency or experience for doing so. You don't have to corpse run. You don't have to go and find where you died to get this currency back. You don't have a stamina bar. So you can't run out of stamina. It's all just about how deft you are with the controller and your own controls. And so you start to bring all this stuff together, and it's like, okay, a lot of what the Souls games do, they're being pretty lax on. Like enemies that aren't bosses but are pretty damn tough. This is true in some Souls games and some Souls-like games like Lies of P. But certain enemies that aren't even bosses won't respawn if you die and you restart at camp. They'll just still be gone because they're like, hey, you beat them once. That was enough. And I like that. So it brings a lot of it forward, and it does really care about perfect dodge and perfect parry and all those different things. but it's forgiving in a way that behooves it as a very fast-paced action game to me.
Mhm.
I can get where someone who wants the difficulty of Sekiro may want that, but I don't know what bumping the game up to a harder difficulty is like. Because like I noticed Velvet and I were talking about him playing it, and that he's been enjoying the game on beginner, story, or whatever difficulty, and he's like, it's the perfect difficulty for him. And I was like, that's cool. I'm glad the game has got that, a way for you to kind of experience a game that you enjoy, but without as much frustration as sometimes you end up having.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this game tries to scale in a way that brings some of those mechanics back or punishes you more for not being as good at parrying. I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't know. It's not a bad thing either way. I didn't play enough to have much of an opinion. For me, it was just, I did the first boss fight, right? Against that thing with the red hands, right at the start. Like the first.
Yeah. When you're still on the beach or whatever.
Right. And that's what I did. And I had this, it wasn't because of anything the game did, but when people talked about it, it was like, oh, it's a Sekiro game. It's like Sekiro. So then when I went in and I tried to play it that way and it didn't work, I was like, oh, well, interesting. And then it was 1 a.m, so I turned it off. I'll get back to Stellar Blade. It seems like a good game. And I've heard it's not particularly long, so it's not like it's going to take a bunch of my time away. So
that's good. So far, I'm very impressed with the game. I think I'm a little less worried about time at this particular moment, but considering that the other JRPG I played this year was Final Fantasy Rebirth, and it's a great game and I loved it, but the game is fucking long. Jesus Christ. I am kind of hoping that this game isn't just insanely long, so that's good. But yeah, I'm very impressed with the game. I think it's weird because it shouldn't matter, but since I do have the knowledge of knowing that this is a team that's come off of phone games, I continue to be even more impressed than I would be if this was a team of people who were, already making console games and just pumping up their value. It's pretty crazy that they got this much right coming off of a phone game that is essentially a gacha game. And it's more interesting to me that this game is not a gacha game, at least not in the gachapon way. Instead, this is a gacha game in whether or not it was false advertisement on Sony's part, but we'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, I've been very impressed with the game because I think when you think of a developer that way, it's very easy and intuitive to fall into thinking, oh, they're going to try and do all the same phone game tricks on me on console. And Stellar Blade seems pretty damn tailor designed to not do that, which is interesting.
Really? Okay.
Well. Yeah, and the reason I find that interesting is that it either shows that there's a need or a want for developers in the phone space to diversify into games so that they have a stream in both sides of where gaming is at its biggest, or that there's enough money in creating a single player game, if you can do it well enough, that it's it's doable to migrate. Because who knows if they're going to keep making more phone games. They may just keep supporting Nike or Nikki or however you say that for a while they do this game, and then maybe keep making single player games. But I do find it very interesting that they even wanted to cross that line, because you often hear that phone gaming and mobile gaming is so profitable that it feels weird for someone to want to cross over into console. If anything, we've seen a lot of developers cross from console gaming and PC gaming into mobile gaming because of how lucrative it seemingly is.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. All right. Well, there goes our Baldur's Gate 3, Stellar Blade, Fallout, all that. Hey, go play any of those games if it sounds good to you. Or play Fallout New Vegas.
Not on
or
PS3.
Fallout 3. Or
Don't
Xbox Series X.
Play them on Xbox. Or PC. Or Steam.
Or PC.
But not PS3.
Dude, I kind of want to play Fallout 4 on PC so I can get the mod where people have gone back through the game and just made all the choices and everything play off differently so that it feels like a traditional Fallout. You know what I mean?
I do. Yes.
So who knows? But of course, the want to play it on console is definitely there. So we'll see how that ends up going. Yeah, there we go. Can't get trophies. Or can I now?
You can.
with Ghost of Tsushima.
Oh, yes.
That's the problem. I don't think I can play the PlayStation version of that game. It would be sick if PlayStation would allow you. There's no reason they would. But if they would allow you to be like, hey, this game is on PlayStation and on PC, so you can log into your PlayStation account on Steam and get trophies in the Steam version of this. They'd never allow that. But
it would be very sick. I would love that.
Be a lot cooler if they did. So I'm going to start, before we go into the community's take, I'm going to start with a question that was really kind of in last week's episode, and I don't think we ended up getting around to it. We didn't put it in the news. I think we maybe mentioned it very briefly. I know we talked about it a little bit in Discord. But No Fate, Sean One Neo, longtime listener, longtime patron, he says he took to Twitter over at Triangle SQRD, where you can follow us if you want to be part of that. And he said, with Embracer Group splitting into 3 groups, what does this mean for THQ Nordic and studios like Gunfire Games? Basically, what's the chances of us ever getting Darksiders 4 and or another sequel to Remnant? So first thing to say there is I'm pretty sure Gunfire Games is owned by THQ Nordic. So that much is good in terms of we don't have to worry about them not having work in the same capacity if they were just still being contracted under them. So that part's good. The problem does come from the fact that if you're splitting these up, how are they actually divvying these up? I wouldn't get your hopes up necessarily, as much as it pains me to say this. I wouldn't get your hopes up to see another Darksiders game anytime soon, because the games have never just really been critical darlings. And they've never sold super well, but they always showed the promise of maybe being able to sell well if you account for your budget correctly and make the game. So I think that the series overall has made money, but if you're a company that has problems with income right now and you're bleeding money, I don't think that you look to a franchise like Darksiders to be your obvious beacon out of the darkness of being in a pit of money or a pit of debt, realistically. So my hope is that we see another one. My real answer is that if we see another Darksiders, it may only be when the company's in better position and they have the money to be able to take that risk again. But I hope they do, because Darksiders 3, excellent. Darksiders Genesis, also excellent. Darksiders 2, best of the series, still in my opinion. Darksiders 1, also quite good. So yeah, Chris, I don't think I've ever really taken you to be much of a Darksiders fan, but do you have any thoughts on this?
I do not. I've tried the Darksiders games a couple times, but I've never finished one.
Yeah, I don't know. Whenever people ask me that now, I don't know if I like them because I played them when they were coming out and new, and I still hold some kind of feelings toward them based on nostalgia, or just that I think they're genuinely good. Because like Darksiders 3 was a very big shakeup for the series, which every game is different from the previous one, realistically. I think Darksiders 2 realistically is the one to play if you're going to experiment with the series, and a lot of people try and start at 1. And I don't think 1's the right call, because I love 1 and it is a great game, but it's the most dated of them, and it's very obviously the most dated of them. Whereas Darksiders 2 is like original THQ's like last big swing game, and they put a bunch of money in it, and you can feel it. The game feels really good, and it's packed with stuff to do. All of it feels super high quality. It doesn't have some of that weird AA jank that you see in the original Darksiders that comes both from budget and time of when it came out. So if you ever get back around to it, you should really try and sink your teeth into Darksiders 2. But
yeah, the one I played was DS1.
Yeah. War Mastered,
yeah.
Still a great game.
It's just one of those things
it's much more dated.
That's what I was going to say. It's very dated, and I want to play the first one if I'm going to play the second and third, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting because the way they actually play, it doesn't matter if you've played 1 or 3, and you can play 3 without having to have played 1 and 2. There's little nods here and there that give you an idea, but since the games are all about different characters doing different things at different time periods, they don't require the other one's knowledge, thankfully. If I were you, because of that, I think this is a good thing. I would actually try and get into the series with Darksiders 2 and then carry that goodwill into Darksiders 1 so that you can see what happens with War and his timeline. Okay. But you'll be a little bit more endeared to the series, and the jank will be a little less likely to throw you off. Yes.
All right. I'll give it a shot.
Yeah. So there you go. No Fate.
So those games emulate other games, right? Because I know I've heard people say that like Darksiders 1 is like Legend of Zelda. What is
Beats God of War.
Darksiders 2?
Yeah. So I'd say Zelda. I'd say the first one is like it's a lot of Zelda and a little bit of God of War. I think is kind of playing in there, and you could even argue maybe a little bit Devil May Cry, but not quite as much. 2 ups the scale a whole lot more and gives you kind of open world environments. But I actually think it apes the old Prince of Persia games pretty well and offers a lot of unique switches to it while still having a little bit of what you liked about the first game's Zelda flair. Because like you can ride a horse in the second game through some of its larger hubs, because the second game is like really big hubs that are, well, for the time period, really big hubs that are still pretty well sized for today. And there's a lot of interconnectivity and jumping between different dimensions with a lot of level design variation, a really big sprawling story. But I'd say that one's more God of War, Prince of Persia than it is, the other one. And there's a lot more platforming in it that feels... Did you played the Sands of Time?
Some of it, yeah.
Okay, so those games have got like the very free flow parkour where like you can grab onto like pillars in the air, spin around them and jump to the other one. You see a lot of that in this game, but in a good way. And like the platforming plays a big part in it, but not in a way that feels as clunky as in 1. Because 1 has platforming, but it feels like Zelda Ocarina of Time's platforming that's there to add an extra wrinkle into the game, but it's not necessarily very fleshed out. So that's how I'd look at it.
Cool.
And then 3 is a Souls-like.
And see, that's the most interesting one to me.
Yeah. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but that is like, it's really funny how they just end up choosing a game and being like, we're going to take that game's basic format and run with it. But it's cool. I still think that as much as I love 3, it was made on a different budget and on a quick timeline, because when they ended up picking up THQ, when Nordic ended up buying THQ and becoming THQ Nordic, people wanted to see Darksiders come back around. Genesis is also excellent. It's essentially just a top-down, twin stick RPG, whatever you want to call it. Really good.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'll have to give them a shot.
Yeah. All right. There you are. No Fate. Hope that answers your question. Let's see. I think we are probably good to go ahead and run into the community stake for now. And this is an interesting one. I didn't get as many responses as I was hoping, but I do think it's something that kind of begs a question, because I think I hear this topic talked about a lot. And the community stake is really simple. We talked about Stellar Blade, and with the controversy surrounding Stellar Blade's last-minute censorship after enjoying the PR boost from claiming there'd be no censorship, and showing the game without these changes in promotional material for months and months and months, how do you feel about the role of advertising in gaming, and what do you think constitutes, quote, false advertisement? Because I've seen false advertisement come up a lot, and I think Sony is actually giving in to give some people refunds because of the idea of false advertisement. But I've seen some people say that this should rise to the level of a lawsuit, and I don't think that that's going to happen. I'd love to be proven wrong if people really feel that strongly about it. But before we dig into it, Chris, I want to kind of get your feel on this, because I know you're a little outside looking in. You're excited about Stellar Blade, but I don't think it was necessarily like a super hot on the menu for you thing at the moment. Having seen the little bit of changes, covering up some cleavage and stuff, there's an image where there's a store that's called the R Store, and on a same wall as the R Store sign that was completely off in the corner, much smaller, it just said hard in graffiti, and people thought that the hard in graffiti and then way over here on the side R was an implication toward the N-word. So what are you feeling here? Do you think the censorship matters? Do you even care? And what do you think really rises to false advertisement?
I don't think there's any false advertisement here, first of all. I will say that Sony does have a one return policy. So you can return a game and claim just about any reason, they will give you a refund. So I think it's a little bit of a misnomer for people to be claiming Sony is giving this game or is giving refunds for the game, because of false advertising, because Sony will give you a free refund once.
Yeah.
So
I'll be the first to say I don't actually know how true that is.
I can tell you it's true because that's what they said when I returned Cyberpunk was you can use your one-time refund here. So even Cyberpunk was part of that. Whether when it blew up later or not was different, but they give you one. So I'm not saying that maybe these people have all had refunds before and this is the second time. But until that comes out, it's just, to me, that seems like a little bit of reading what you want into a situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay.
It's not false advertising to put a piece of cloth on tits. It's not.
No, it's, well, okay. I'm not saying you're wrong, and I'm really not saying anything. But what I do think is interesting is that you're talking about people reading into things that aren't really there. And I actually think that that's exactly what's happening with this hard R image, where people are using this as a beacon to say that, where people are using this to say that's the reason they changed it. And look, I don't care that they changed it realistically, but I think this reminds me of when the conversation, and it probably is still going on a little bit, but around that Nickelodeon documentary was coming around, The Quiet on Set. Mm-hmm. And I remember I watched that with my wife, and there's plenty of actual things to be disgusted about in how things were handled and what was going on the sets and everything. And there were times, though, when we were watching that documentary where I thought,
I know what
it feels like they're just looking for shit to add because they wanted another episode because they knew this was going to be a big deal and they could sell this for more money if it's more episodes, because they keep insisting that there's no possible way that something squirting onto a kid's face could be funny to a child, and that was entirely a cum joke for adults. And I'm like, guys, I remember being 7, watching the Amanda show and thinking it was fucking hilarious that somebody got something squirted in their face. And I can also tell you that without my daughter seeing anything, and we are very specific, my daughter doesn't see, I was shown sexual content way too, and saw my parents being sexual with each other far too early. So I know, and we've taken big steps to not do that with my daughter. And as far as little as when she was 3, if we were eating something like they sell the applesauce that comes in like a little tube. Basically, it's like a little thing that you just drink it out of, but you suck it out of it. And if I wasn't paying attention and I was holding one and she was holding one, she would try and squeeze it to get the applesauce to shoot in my face because she thought that shit was funny. And I remember thinking while I'm watching this, y'all are so dead set on this being a cum shot that y'all are just trying to tell me that. And then I remember there was a part where they showed Ariana Grande with a potato trying to get juice out of the potato. And they were like, this is very clearly talking about trying to rub cum out. And whatever on that. But what got me is that they were like, well, here she is holding a phallic shaped object. And I'm like, when have you ever looked at a potato and thought, that's a dick? In my life, I have never once looked at a potato and been like, that's phallic shaped.
Well, I think it's one of those things, right, where objectively Dan Snyder is creepy, or Schneider is creepy.
But that's like, what I'm saying. You didn't even need to put those two in there. You gave me all the evidence I needed.
Yeah, because what I was going to say was it reminded me a lot of like kids realizing that the stuff they were watching as kids had jokes that were also funny for the adults watching. Because movies do that all of the time.
Sure.
Like, I know you like this movie. Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs has one of the funniest jokes I've ever heard of the leak in the boat. It is the funniest joke, but no child understands why that joke is funny. But that's a joke for adults. It's
so funny, though.
It's the funniest.
There's a leak in the boat.
It's so good. But they have stuff like that for sex jokes. Like that happens in kids' movies because a kid won't realize it, but an adult will and be like, oh, that's funny. And then the kids are now watching that and being like, that was funny to me as a kid. Because they say it in the documentary. That was funny for me as a kid, but now as an adult, it looks bad. It's like, yeah, because now you're an adult and you get the other joke.
Okay, but hold on, back up. Sometimes they're not, because as much as they were also like the boy with the nose, they put noses on his shoulder pads and they look like dick and balls. I'm like, yeah, guess what they also look like, guys?
Nose.
A nose.
Yeah, you're
and
right.
My point, and they were like they were going, now whether or not that's how they actually feel or that they were just bending over backwards, they were acting like all those things weren't funny to them. And that's fine. I get that they were just doing a job, but I can tell you as a kid who watched that, it was funny. I can tell you from my daughter who hasn't watched things like that she inherently finds these things funny. Because kids do have a very different sense of humor. My favorite jokes for anything that comes up like that, right, are jokes that are kind of double. They are funny to kids for a completely different reason than they're funny to adults, and they play off of both sides. But that's kind of what I'm going into that, like that hard R. Having graffiti that says hard from a Korean studio who's just trying to find something for reference. There's an entire Facebook group that is images that go hard, and almost all the time they're just something that says hard and then something so like one I saw quite literally today, it was images that go hard and it was a picture of hard road, and then attached to it at the top the text just said hard. And I'm like, I am not surprised at all that they ended up with graffiti on a wall that said hard, and that there was a very tiny illuminated R in the bottom right corner to show you the store sign. And I'm like, people are just looking for things to be offended by. I don't care that they changed it, but it was stupid that they even felt the need to change it. That's kind of where I'm at on there. Well, but we get to this thing where you were talking about false advertisement. And here's the thing. While I may agree with you that it feels kind of dumb to worry about whether or not a piece of cloth was added to a suit. Yeah, that feels dumb to me. But the flip side of it is they did show you the game without all of this, building the expectation that if you were to get the game, this would be a part of it. So if that did matter to you and that was a value judgment to you, I can see being like, yeah, but I bought the game under the auspices that it wouldn't have these things.
I guess I guess you're like kind of, I don't know, because to me, okay, this entire argument sounds like a bunch of guys are really upset that one of 50,000 porn videos on Pornhub got DMCA'd. That's what this sounds like to me, because the naked suit is still in the game. That suit itself, her whole asshole is out, and it's just got a little bunny tail in it. And I don't mind all of that stuff, but like, to me, you know, I don't know that I'm the first person to say this, but they could have very much just, the ESRB could have been like, change one of these, cover up a little bit on this one, or else we're going to give you an AO. All of this is possible.
All of it's possible. But here's the wrinkle that I think is very important. And I also want to offer something on, while you're right that outside looking in, it's very easy to see that this is just dudes being mad that they can't jerk off to Eve now. Which, again, if that's why you wanted to buy the game and you bought the game thinking that that's what you're going to get, I mean, I feel for you. But point being, I think what part of what comes into there is this feeling that if they force him to change that, what else did they force him to change that we don't know about? I think that comes up because the problem with censorship is that you don't know where the line was drawn, and you start to wonder, well, what else did they change? And did they change something that really didn't cross a line, but they determined that it crossed a line and therefore the game had to change? I could see that, but let me back up a little bit more. And I think the real wrinkle into this that makes this a complicated talk, and why I think false advertisement is even coming, is because coming up as a problem here, is I do think that by going and taking to Twitter and allowing the team to share a week ago that the game is going to be uncensored in all regions, and then the week of release, pretty much as soon as the game was coming out, patching the game with changes that you probably knew had to happen anyway. The question becomes, why did you go out and try and benefit from the PR boon of being able to say this game was uncensored just to turn around and then censor it? If you wanted to make the censorship, why didn't you just own that at Sony and say, hey, we want this changed and we don't want you running around and parading how it's uncensored. This is what we want. We're partners in this game. We have a say, make the change.
I mean, they own it, so.
Or the ESRB, even if it was that, right? If the ESRB said, hey, but the game was already rated by the time that they stated that the game was uncensored everywhere, right? So if you knew the ESRB wanted you to change something, why didn't you just say, hey, we're glad the game got this rating. There's a few changes that the ESRB demanded with it. Here we are. Cool.
Look, here's
I think
my
the
thing.
problem comes down to it was communicated in a way that seems fishy because it seems like they wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted to be able to proudly boast that the game wasn't censored while then ultimately censoring the game so that they hopefully didn't offend anybody. And then I want to get to other people's answers, but I'm still curious to see what you have.
I think in terms of that, this is the last thing I'll say because I don't want to piss off either side. But I think with this, my realistic take is that I would be, while reluctant to have the conversation, I would be more willing to hear it if this patch happened in 3 weeks. Because no matter what you tell me, I understand what's on the physical disc. I fully understand that. But the intended game for general public consumption is the game with the 1.01 patch or whatever it is. So the version that the developers and Sony, whether they censored it or not, in the day one patch, the one that they intend you to play at launch has that piece of cloth. Mm-hmm. So if the game launched the day one patch with this outfit and in its original form, titties all out, and then Hiroki Totoki was like, oh no, we got to change that in 2 weeks, and then they patched it, I'd be more willing to hear the censorship argument. But to me, this kind of feels like you reading my book and then being upset that I changed something in the final release. Like, the version with this early version is not the one that you were supposed to get. So I don't know.
I'll give you this, right? I'll grant you that when you're marketing a game, you have to start showing it early. And that means you have to show things on very early builds in comparison while people continue to work on the final build. I'll give you that, right? I agree with you all the way up to the point that 1 week ago, they didn't have to say anything and they chose to. That's ultimately it. That game had been gold already. They knew what was going to be on the disc, and they chose to parade that information around. So while I agree with what you're saying, I also agree with anyone who feels like they were misled, because the problem that I think ends up coming up here, and I'm curious to see if this does come up in any of these responses, is that the propagation of news could be such that you don't understand that this is happening until after you pre-ordered it because of what you'd seen and the statement that the game was going to be uncensored. So you chose to support the game. And then the propagation of news did not allow you a window to take back your pre-order. And now your only option is to hopefully seek a refund if it rises to the point where you think that you should not support the game for this. All I'll say is I at least can see where it feels a little dirtbally to do that and have it be last minute.
For me, like, I'm sorry if I'm on the wrong side of the argument, but I just can't bring myself to care about them covering a part of the game I'm not even supposed to see because it's a third-person game from behind. So, like, I get it. Like, if that's what you want, the hill you want to die on, I respect it. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm not going to help you either.
Well, we've got a response here from Jehudi MD, longtime listener, longtime patron. He says, personally, for me, as long as it's not a huge deviation change in gameplay, I'm fine with it. I personally don't buy games as soon as they are released anymore, except in very specific situations. By the time I do decide to buy, all of those controversies would have been ironed out and would help in making a better decision about buying or not. Another perk of waiting to buy games, I guess. And yeah, there's something to be said about patient gaming. You miss out on the zeitgeist of the conversation around the game as it's brand new, but you get a lot of time for the game to be ironed out, any problems to be shored up, any controversies to play out and land on either fixing it, changing it, or sticking by their guns. And you kind of get to make the decision on probably the most solid piece of content that you're going to have. Not to mention that you get to hear a lot of people talk about the game and read a lot of reviews if that's something that you care about, and kind of go through that. So I think that's a good one. TT Dog 666, another one of our longtime listeners, longtime patrons. He says, if it's censorship to remove potentially offensive imagery, in this case, racially offensive, then I'm fine with it. Can't abide racist of any description. And I agree with you. Damn, Chris, you just blinked in and out.
Yeah, I was coughing and I hit the wrong button.
Anyway, I agree with you. And at least as far as it goes on this game, while I agree with you and I don't care that they changed it, and I can even understand the argument that they changed it to show that there was no intention to be there, I do feel like this is also very easily... I don't think there was any reason to think that this was a specifically purposely done thing. I don't think that they purposely put hard on the wall and then had the R there because someone was back in the designing room going, just wait till I see it. I don't think that was happening.
I'm going to tell you straight up, this would be so much funnier if that was the case. This is a boring story because it's clearly an accident and they went, I didn't realize that was offensive. We're not from there. This doesn't mean anything to us, but we'll change it because I understand what you're saying. But like, this story would be funny if some guy in the corner of Shift Up was like, those Americans are going to be so mad. I'm sorry, that's funny.
What got me is I didn't even realize all this was happening, right? Until where I work, we have a shipping dock, and I was walking through shipping dock, and one of the guys, actually two of the guys were having a conversation, and they knew I was interested in Stellar Blade. And so they started talking about it and asked if I'd seen this. And one of the dudes is a black dude, Josh. And we busted out laughing because he was talking about it. And he was like, it's clearly an accident. He's like, that'd be different if they just had one of the characters walk on screen and say the N-word. He goes, actually, I thought he's like, I'd bust out laughing at that point because damn, bold ass Koreans. But point being, if it was more obvious and blatant, it would, like you said, it would at least feel more story worthy. That's why I'm actually kind of glad to see that most people haven't really owned in on this. Most of the people I've seen talk about this at all just are talking about the fact that a developer may even feel pressure to change something that was so obviously not an issue and obviously not on purpose. And that's why I also don't care that they did change it, because it was so obviously not on purpose that they were just like, we'll just change it to some other graffiti word.
Yeah, cool. It just seems to me like, not a big deal. We'll make this change. We're not committed to this graffiti art that repeats over and over again in the game. You know. Yeah.
The thing about
it's look.
So this is where
stuff like this is why companies. I can't believe I'm going to say this because they are very annoying. Stuff like this is why companies like Sweet Baby Inc. exist. And it is important to not accidentally offend people. Like, I understand that there's a lot of, these people are babies, this wasn't on purpose. But like, something like this is not, for me, a situation where you want to stand on your morals and be like, no, that piece of graffiti that got accidentally placed here because we hit copy paste on the same graffiti over and over in the game. It's offensive to some people. We might as well fix it. You know, this isn't them cutting out a whole story beat. You know, I would do this with the stuff I'm working on. I've said it to you, but there's times where I'm like, I don't know how this would be seen, even though the black people that are in my book are not Africans, right, or any of that. That doesn't mean that I should portray them in a way that is offensive to people in the real world because they're not real. It's just an excuse, you know.
But you skirt around one of the interesting things around the idea of taking offense, and that's that it's really, I think a lot of people get up in arms over this because it's very clear and easy to see a road where people start changing things that really aren't grand scale offensive because of a worry of something else. So while I get your take, right, you don't want to accidentally do something. It's good that you have that state of mind. And as if you have that state of mind and you're purposely designing it to make sure you don't do that, that's a good thing. I'm not saying that that's a problem. But at the same time, if someone else is designing characters that happen to have some kind of, melanin in their skin as far as the way they're looking at them, but they're saying to themselves, this is how I envision this group of people that I've come up with, and they don't have any ill intent, it shouldn't really matter. And the complicated thing there is, like, I know that you agree with that, but the complicated thing there is that it requires a trust that people, like, we live in a very untrusting society. I'm going to throw that out there first and foremost, where anytime something that could be taken in an offensive way, it's almost always immediately thrown out that the person meant it with a negative intent and that they did it on purpose and that this was something they could have, should have. whatnot handled and knew before they released it, and they chose to release it anyway. And that's a lot of the times the way that it's approached, where I think it's very easy to say, yeah, but my people in my book have dark skin for completely different reasons. They're not tied to any actual human race. They're not tied to anything. And the reason that I know that that's the case is because even something as simple as orcs and goblins that do not literally exist in our world at all. They are completely fantastical creatures, given the fact that orcs are supposed to be a stand-in for black people and goblins are supposed to be a stand-in for Jewish people. And we had this conversation around the idea whenever Hogwarts Legacy was coming up, and people kept saying that this was coded language for hating the Jews. And I'm just being like, that is a you problem. If you see a goblin and you think of a Jewish person, I hate to tell you, I have never once seen a goblin and thought, can you believe they would do that to the Jewish people?
So that's not what I mean, to be clear. What I mean is, writing the single black person in your fantasy novel to be a slave. That's the kind of thing that someone would look at you and be like,
you're being overtly negligent, whether or not you meant it.
Exactly. It's like, oh, you have one gay person in your story and they got shot in the head at the beginning. Oh, well, you included them. That's.
It's like the beginning of It Chapter 2 with the gay couple.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember that being a big controversy too.
It's one of these things where it's not. I'm not saying you have to include all of these things, but there's small sensitivity in everything that is not big swaths of story. But like, if a side character in my book is a black slave and that's the only black person, I see the argument of why that would be offensive. But if one of my main characters is a black slave who rises up, kills his slave, you know what I mean? Like, has a whole story arc, you can get away with that. Nobody is saying black people can't be slaves in books. What I'm saying is the only black person in your book probably should not be a slave.
And only a slave. Though, that's interesting because I've heard, people kind of trying to invert the argument and be like, well, if I decide to make it a black person who rises up and overcomes slavery, that it's going to be viewed negatively and that the black people are being violent. And it's tying into the real world thing of people saying that black people are the reason for violence and what do they call those, riots or whatever, like what happened, plenty of times happened throughout the last few years in the United States. And so, look, that's what we were kind of talking about last week and the week before when you were talking about random things about your writing and trying to understand where to have the ability to have creative freedom, but also try and be mindful enough to skirt a line. And it's a really complicated way to live. But that's why I really am a big fan of trying to look at people's intent with their actions. And I think if it's pretty obvious that the intent was not to do that, I think you got to be really careful about giving people too much hell for something that could very obviously not be on purpose. Yeah. It's complicated because you really are just trusting that they didn't mean it. Whereas there is a very small but real reality of a chance of there being a Korean dude in Shift Up sitting in there and being like,
absolutely,
haha, I put this R over here on purpose because I see hard and but the chances, it's the Occam's razor, right? Do you really think that that's the most likely explanation for it? If it's not, you probably shouldn't go there.
This is a situation where, again, I'm advocating for changing it because I don't think it matters. Like, I don't think changing this graffiti matters, and it does make 1% of the player base more comfortable. That's fine.
Yep.
But, there's certain arguments like what you were just saying, where it's like, now you're just going too far. You know what I mean? Like, there's levels to all of this. Just because I'm saying you should be sensitive of the way you portray people doesn't mean that you can't portray people in negative ways. You can write a Jewish banker, but maybe they shouldn't be the only Jew in the book. It's all of this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And again, it doesn't. It's just, especially in writing, and especially even in what we're talking about in video games, right? Like, you're making it. It's funny. I made that argument with Belko Experiment, where I hated the music playing in the scene. And you guys, one of the arguments, I think it was you or Blake, was like, yeah, but that's the music that was playing on the radio. And I just looked at you guys, I'm like, well, it's not a real fucking radio. Change the song. I don't like the song. It's the same. It's just the same thing in games and the same thing there. But let's hear from the community, because I've been talking for a while.
One final thing on that, because I think it's really funny, is part of the reason that you can tell it's really complicated to navigate that as a creator is because something as simple as you being the same race as the people you chose to write in a way that would otherwise look offensive suddenly absolves you of all those sins. If a Jewish guy writes a story about Jewish people being bankers, no problem at all.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying? And like, Spike Lee or whatever his name is can write a movie about what goes on in the hood because he's a black dude, and everybody just has to be like, cool. And that goes to what we were talking about in that midweek matinee episode, where it's like, well, you may have a problem with it, but the dude who wrote this movie is the minority in which he wrote the movie for. And so it's really interesting that storytelling is really hard to figure out, because there's sometimes where you just are like, this is a character I've come up with, but there is sometimes that feeling of maybe I shouldn't do this because for whatever reason it is, somehow society just chooses to give passes for things to certain people. And it's always that if you have a fear that you may not have the pass, you start to have that feeling of like, should I change it? But yeah, going back to the changing of this thing, much like I say, I don't care. And of course he doesn't care either. The argument that I get from anyone else who's looking at this is that by changing something that you clearly didn't mean to, you're bending the knee, and you might be able to get people to force you to change other things that aren't necessary. It's the same argument that went around with the internet whenever they say the internet forced Sega to change the Sonic design. They changed it for the better. He looks way better. But did it really matter that Sonic looked that way from an offensive standpoint? Not at all. But they got bullied into doing what everyone else wanted because they were fucking terrified.
That was a pretty offensive design.
Can you? Hedgehogs do not look this way.
No, if he was a weasel, I would have actually bought the design.
All right, so we've got Rude Days 93. He goes, this is a tough question because technically you could argue 90% of games are falsely advertised. I'm glad he's bringing this up because false advertisement is a big hint of this question, because I have been surprised before at some of the cases that have actually won from false advertisement. One quick one to just reference as we're here. Killzone Shadowfall got a false advertisement suit that they lost against because the back of the game case said that the game was in 1080p, but the multiplayer was technically in 1080i or whatever. It was like they split one of the axes resolutions to make sure that the multiplayer ran at 60 frames per second. And since that's not technically 1080p, they lost a false advertisement suit.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind here. So he says you could technically argue that 90% of games are falsely advertised because of performance issues that most games have, or because many trailers in most games have heavy amounts of CGI and the gameplay is hidden in there. And maybe it's because I'm used to all these things. Games being falsely advertised doesn't really affect me or bother me because the real gameplay proof is out there on the internet and you can find it. Now, back before the 2010s, when the internet wasn't that huge and you were mainly going off of one commercial or the box art, that's when being falsely advertised could really get you. And he goes, I'm looking at you, Dragon Ball Z Sagas. Here's the thing. I actually love Dragon Ball Z Sagas while understanding that it's a shit game. let all that be what it is. He brings an interesting thing to mind here for me. And it's something that, as I was reading it, it was just kind of coming to my head. The real shame about, and I understand where the idea of false advertisement even comes into, right? Is that you don't want to buy something that you don't get a chance of understanding where it is before you spend your money. But also, how many times have you been falsely led into believing that something is one thing, experienced it, and then been so happy that it was completely different than what they tried selling you as part of its marketing twist? Because I think there's a really big argument to say that Inscription, which is an incredibly killer game, is falsely advertised if you really want to try and nitpick. Because arguably you can't advertise what makes Inscription great because you give it away.
I'm going to be straight up with you. I think the only game that I would truly say was falsely advertised is The Last of Us Part 2.
And see, I'm going to go on the same limb and say the whole point of that was what movie trailers do when they show you something that's not in the final cut. And you might be right.
Oh, I'm not saying I have a problem with it. I'm saying that's the only game I've seen other than the Killzone 2 E3 demo.
Now that
The Last of Us 2 is the only game I've ever seen that actually lied. Okay, there's 2 games, Metal Gear Solid 2 and The Last of Us 2.
Metal Gear Solid 2 definitely lied.
No spoilers for that one. No spoilers for either, but both of them lied. But we're okay with that because the game was good.
Yeah,
yes.
It's a great effect. That's the point. And that's the complicated thing here, because I feel that way about plenty of things. I feel that way about things that are not even interactive. But interactive things are more rewarding when suddenly you feel what you expected shift and you're like, I would have never expected this to happen. This is insane.
So I have to ask, what is your definition of false advertisement in the entertainment medium?
It's a really good question. I don't know, because I've never actually purported that anything has falsely advertised to me.
Because
you know
here's
what I mean?
the thing. Yeah, because you can't properly advertise entertainment, right? Because
dude, take away from that. You can't. Here's the reality. This is probably why I've never felt falsely advertised to. All advertisement is selling you on an idea. That's it.
Right. And that's kind of what I was going to say, right? Like, how granular do you go with false advertisement in games or false advertisement in anything, right? Mm-hmm. If I sell you a book and the premise is a long foretold prophecy has marked this person to lead the country, but then at the climax of the book, you find out that the prophecy wasn't real. Was I false advertising to you? No, I was twisting. I was doing a twist on a trope of, of prophecy and the chosen one trope, right? That's the twist of the book. But if I tell you that in the advertisement, you don't need to read the book. It's the same thing when people are like, "Oh, they showed too much in the trailer. I saw the ending of Deadpool and Wolverine," and it's like, okay, so you don't want to be properly advertised to, so they're gonna false advertise to you, because if they tell you everything so that you know what you're going into, it's not fun. So I actually feel like in talking about this, you cannot false advertise entertainment unless you advertise a movie as a rom-com with Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, and it turns out to be a horror movie with, Kane Hodder and I don't know, the dude from Get Out. Like that's false advertising. And arguably,
I would love
that would be a great theater experience.
That'd be a fantastic theater experience as you watch a group of people become slowly horrified.
Yeah, I'm saying Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are not in the movie at all.
Yeah, see, I thought M. Night Shyamalan's. Yeah, that's even better,
right? Like
they're in the opening scene where it's the people in the horror movie watching a movie with Angelina Jolie.
That's what I was gonna say. Like the trailer is a trailer for an in-universe movie of this slasher movie by Jordan Peele.
Yeah,
it sounds like a thing you would do.
I love that idea, and it's so funny. What I was going to say is I thought the M. Night Shyamalan's Avatar: The Last Airbender was going to be a good movie, and turns out it was a hunk of shit. That was the twist. So, no, look, I'm going to go a little bit deeper, and then we have one more response that comes specifically from one of the people that was the reason I even thought to ask this question, because I did see this topic blow up over Twitter. But before I get there, because his is a fairly long response, but I want to read it all because I think if I know him, it's pretty well thought out. Advertisement's whole point is to sell you on an idea. And I want to reinforce that I said that with the fact that every advertisement you've ever seen is not selling you on the real product that you would go and pick up. Almost never is that it. Because what are they doing? Think about a car advertisement, right? When I went and bought my Bronco, all of the advertisements for Broncos are going mudding and going through huge dirt drifts and climbing mountains and doing all these crazy things with the Bronco. I'm not buying that lifestyle when I buy the Bronco, am I? No. They're selling me on the idea of what the Bronco could allow me to experience. And I'm choosing to buy it whether I want to give into that experience or not. Right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I don't do that. We don't have mountains around here, really. Not like that. I don't have a lot of time for that. I bought the Bronco because it's big. I like the way it looks. Has room for my family. When we go on vacation, things like the beach, it has room for me to carry my dogs in the back. And then when we go to the beach, it's got a rubber floor mat and liner so we can all get in it. Sand can get everywhere. It's got plugs that I can lift up. And the rubber floor liner can just spray down with water and get all the sand out. Great. When I go to visit my family up in the mountains once or twice a year, I have an easier time, with terrain and whatnot in the mountains than when it's icy. That's what I bought it for. That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing its job. When you look at a McDonald's commercial and they show you a double quarter pounder, have you ever known that they don't use real food when they're advertising food? It's all fake because you want the cheese to look a specific level of melted. Guess what you can't do with real cheese?
Make it look a specific level of melted.
And do it over and over again so you can get all the shots you need to make this work. All right, so the meat's not real meat. The buns aren't real buns. The grease that you see sweating off of it, it's not even real grease.
Oh, it's
something they sprayed on.
It's mist.
And that's my whole point, is that the point of advertising is to essentially lie to you to get you to buy into the idea. And then you just go get the product and you're just seeing whether or not the product meets up with the value that was given this thing. And if you're okay with what you got out of the product versus the value you spent. And there's a very okay argument for you to go, I thought Stellar Blade was going to be one thing at this price point that I was willing to pay for. And now that it's not, this price point doesn't make sense to me. I'm moving on from it. That's perfectly fine. It's also perfectly fine to want developers, in my opinion at least, to not want to bend the knee at every single thing so that they can hopefully not bully other people into changing things that don't really need to be changed, because being offensive is so complicated. That's what makes it, offense is subjective. Mm-hmm. There are things that are more universally offensive, but the reality is that there is no one thing that everyone hates equally, because that's just not the human experience.
Yeah. Look, again, coming from where I'm coming from, like studying stuff like this, to me, it's just like, yes, there's sometimes, sensitivity stuff is just a matter of, hey, I don't know if you realize that the only person in your book that says ain't gonna is a black dude, mm-hmm. Or the only person who says share in your book when he's talking about a chair is the Mexican guy. It's all small stuff that like you don't have to, that you can fix to make it just that little bit better,
Sure.
And again, there's big stuff that I would say you don't change.
Yeah. So the last response we're going to get to here is from No Fate. One of our longtime listeners, longtime patrons. Yeah. He says, I'm probably too late to comment on Stellar Blade, but my point is, no, you're not. But my point is, it's just wrong to trick people into buying a product. Sony need to know enough is enough. We won't stand for having the rug pulled from under us anymore. This will have a negative effect on pre-orders in the future. I'm not really talking about the censorship. Other companies have done last-minute scandals, like when Activision added MT after achieving great reviews. No Man's Sky, etc. It's appalling behavior that loses people's trust. If we give an inch, they think it's okay to take a mile. We shouldn't make it easy for them to think it's okay to disrespect people this way. Sony should expect resistance and consequences. If Sony was losing the console war, they wouldn't dream of pulling a stunt like this, and that's my issue. And I think that's an interesting point, because there is something to be said about Sony's really heavy hand when it comes to censorship did not come into play until they had been the head of the console generation for almost the entire PS4 generation. And it was very obvious to them that it was almost impossible to lose. And then they go, we have the power needed to start putting our hand down on this. But I do think there's a very easy way to look at PlayStation 3 era Sony and be like, they would have never censored anything because they wanted controversy. They wanted people to be like, this is why I buy a PS3. This is the place where I can get this thing that nobody else offers. Arguably speaking, there's plenty of very questionable things in Heavy Rain and Beyond Two Souls. Mm-hmm. Throwing it out there. Also, they have an entire game that I love that a lot of people said was problematic, and I don't completely agree with that. But Detroit Become Human, people said it was too on the nose, that this was like basically aping slavery, which of course it was. It's iRobot kind of doing the same thing. But the point being, there was a time when Sony wouldn't dream of doing this because they had the fear of knowing that they had gotten behind the competition before. And you don't see these types of moves from companies until they feel strong enough to get away with it. And whether or not that means that this was actually a bad decision or with ill intent from Sony is really hard to square up. But there is at least a version of you that can see that Sony wouldn't have the thought to do this if they were more preoccupied with making sure that they were a unique, specific place to come to. So I can understand the frustration. I can understand the stress. press. I can understand that it's not even about the censorship and it's more about changing things after people have made a commitment to buy. And I actually think I might agree with you that if you do this often enough, pre-orders are going to start taking hits. And I think we've seen that because even games like Cyberpunk really made pre-orders take a hit because people didn't trust, for the same reason, they didn't trust pre-ordering anymore, because as much as I love Cyberpunk at launch and beat it, and so did Chris, we experienced incredibly rough times with that game. Mm-hmm. So if anyone's ever told me, yeah, I don't want to pre-order games anymore after I pre-ordered Cyberpunk, I completely understand. Whether or not I agree, I understand. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, with that being behind us, let's get talking about some of the news we have here. Chris, is there anything you want to get to before we hop into the news?
Nothing for me.
All right, let's go. Housemarque spun up speculation on Monday after tweeting an image of Celine's eyes in black and white, the protagonist of Returnal and the word tomorrow. Well, tomorrow has arrived, and the announcement is a graphic novel in collaboration with Dark Horse Comics called Returnal, Fallen Hysteria, and an art book. The graphic novel will be 88 pages and releases on October 22nd. There is no date set for the art book, but if you're excited to dig deeper into the world of Returner and Celine, hey, there you have it. A way to dig deeper. One of these days, maybe I'll go back and want to beat that game. It's probably not likely. There's nothing like wanting to like a game and just not being able to get there.
I know. It's like a half chub. Just can't get to it. Whiskey dick.
Y'all, it leaves you feeling unsatisfied.
Exactly.
Next thing we have up, this one's pretty interesting. Satya Nadella has once again fanned the flames of rumors that Xbox will evolve into a full third-party publisher. In an earnings call on Thursday, Satya said that Xbox games have done extremely well in the PlayStation Store, saying they had 7 of the top 25 games on PlayStation, more than any other publisher. He continued saying that Microsoft was prepared to, quote, meet players where they are, end quote. So far, Xbox has released 4 previously first-party exclusives, Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, Sea of Thieves, and Grounded on the PlayStation Store, Sea of Thieves being the most recent of them. It remains to be seen who else will join the Avengers in the PlayStation universe. Nice. But many rumors peg Bethesda title Starfield to be a title coming over after the Shattered Space update, which it seems is slated for fall this year. So yeah, the Shattered Space is like a big expansion update for the game. And that wouldn't surprise me, because one of the things we also saw of Sea of Thieves is that the new season of Sea of Thieves dropped the same day as the PlayStation release.
Yep.
So here's the thing. I see why they would hold on to Starfield a little longer, but I also can see why they'd be like, we've had Starfield long enough. It didn't set the world on fire in the way Skyrim did. This game has not stayed in the the gamer's conscious of conversation long enough. What are your thoughts here? Do we see it or not?
Focus it. His thoughts on what? My thoughts on what?
Specifically,
Starfield?
whether we'll see Starfield.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think now more than ever, I could see us getting Starfield. With the success of Fallout and the hype around Bethesda, it really does make sense. Because look, we know that we're not getting another Fallout game for a long time. At least not a Bethesda Fallout game. Okay, maybe InXile's making a Fallout 2 homage, or maybe Obsidian's got. Dude, I want it. I'm just saying.
Give me. Okay, once you're done with Avowed, give me that next Obsidian Fallout game. Let's go.
Yeah, Obsidian could do Fallout. InXile could do Fallout. Hell, I would even take a. Damn, I can't remember the studio name now. Evil Within.
Oh, damn it.
Tango Gameworks.
A
Tango game. Like, I would love to see them expand more into the Fallout universe. It's very vast. So, but if current development cycles stay the way they are, it would make a ton of sense for them to try and build into that hype on PlayStation and be like, hey, here's Starfield. Or hell, season 2 of Fallout's about to come out. Play the new game from Bethesda, the creators of Fallout, on your PlayStation 5. It's kind of perfect.
I'm going to be curious. My big thing was I always figured Xbox would choose how hard or how not hard to push into this based on how willing the PlayStation community was to bring the games in. And since there's kind of an understanding that while we are a PlayStation podcast and there's a lot of people who are very diehard fans of PlayStation in on here, that the vast majority of who makes up PlayStation's hundreds of millions of units out there are people that just went with what made the most sense to them at the time. And they're not necessarily beholden to PlayStation to the point where they wouldn't play an Xbox game just because it was an Xbox game. If they wanted to play it and it was on the system they had, they'll buy it. I think that that's been proven out here very clearly. Yeah. So I don't think that there'd be any worry that if you release Starfield on PlayStation, that there would just be droves of people who said, we don't want this because it's Xbox's failed game. The reality is the majority of the consumer base would be like, oh, cool. What's this space game? So with that in mind, I do think that there's a way we see Microsoft come further into here. I'm still on the fence as to whether or not I think we'll see day and date titles. I think they'll try and have their cake and eat it too by giving timed exclusivity to all of their first party games. And then after a certain amount of time, just being like, okay, now you get them at PlayStation computer or PlayStation and Nintendo if there's a way for us to get this onto Nintendo's platform.
Yeah, I think, doing my best Phil Spencer impression, but I think it will be a case-by-case basis on what comes day one and what doesn't, or what comes a year later and what comes 7 years later. I think all of that will be dependent on the game. But just listening to Sachi, I think it's clear, like Blade, Indiana Jones, Doom, all of these kind of things that we're worried we might miss. I have a feeling we won't. And honestly,
yeah,
I have no concern that from now on, and I know this has been said before and I'm going to say it again, anything that Xbox shows, I assume I will get to play on PlayStation at some point. Even if it's Gears or Halo.
Yeah, I think that's the thing where right now, look, there might be games that they really do try and hold evergreen. And if there was ever going to be anything, I actually think it would be Forza, Halo, Gears. Those would be the three games that I actually think they'd be like, it's too valuable for us to keep these as a brand, as brand games. But with that in mind, I think it's safe to do what a lot of people do with PlayStation and PC now. If you really don't want to buy a PlayStation, I think it's pretty safe to just assume if a PlayStation shows anything, there's a pretty good chance you'll get to play it on PC eventually.
Yeah.
There you have it. So, I don't quite feel like we're at a point where you're eventually going to see PlayStation games on Xbox, but never say never. I think that there might be a very easy way to have fair games eventually land on Xbox. And Helldivers also repping my Helldivers shirt, by the way.
On Xbox. Great shirt. Put it on Xbox. There's no reason. Like, dude, I get not wanting to give it to Xbox and, all the stuff I've heard. Like, you got your foot on their throat, but just go sell the fucking games. Like, who gives a shit? More players in Helldivers is just a good thing. Go put it on Xbox. Give us all Master Chief skins and move on with our lives.
Yeah. I still think there's a reason why Sony would want to really just reach as much market saturation as they can from PlayStation players getting Helldivers so they make the most money off of it. But then I really do see a point of just being like, okay, now we're opening it to everybody. Because Helldivers 2 is a great game. I think it's a game that will see plenty of life as they continue to do really well with it. I'm glad my shirt finally came in. I ordered this so long ago. My wife was saying that people are going to stop me now thinking this is an actual military shirt because the back of it's got the thing and it's like, how'd you like the taste of freedom? And it's awesome. I love it. It's great. And she was like, people are going to stop you and think, definitely because we're in the South and, military respect is real high here. And people are going to be like, hell yeah, nice shirt.
Dude, and if you get called on stolen valor for wearing a Helldivers 2 shirt, that would be so funny. Funniest thing that could possibly
I don't think that would happen, but I do think, look, here's the thing. I don't do this usually out loud to people who I know are religious because I don't ever have the intent of actually belittling someone for their religious belief. But my wife and I both don't believe. And so sometimes I'll just crack the joke of all things are possible through Jesus Christ. Or most of the time it's Jesus Cristo. Is what I say. Because there's this Creed lip sync thing where they do like the music video for the With Arms Wide Open. and they do a lip sync where they change the lyrics to look like what Scott Stapp could be saying. And on one of them in the music video, it pans around the camera of the big Jesus in Rio de Janeiro, which is called Jesus Cristo or whatever, I think. But so that's just a long running joke. But I was getting gas one day, and I was getting out of the Bronco, and I was going, and she said something, and I said, "Hey, never know, all things are possible through Jesus Christ," as I was getting out the door. And this dude walking back to his car was like, "Don't you know it?" And I was like, "Oh no." and I just didn't say anything to him because I was like, I don't want to lie to him by playing it and making it seem like I'm into this, but I also don't want to say anything further to belittle him. So I'm just going to pretend this interaction didn't happen. And she was like, "That's what's going to happen with your shirt. Someone's going to be like, 'Hell yeah, fucking military, right?' And I'm going to be like, 'Yeah.'" So, all right, we got a couple things left to talk about real quick. Kingdom Hearts 4 seems to be gracing PS5 boxes next year, according to an increasingly reliable online tipster by the name of Daniel Rickman. He goes by Daniel RPK. The leaker posted to his Patreon that he's heard about a 2025 release date for Kingdom Hearts 4, just days after his claim Sonic Frontiers 2 is in development. Was backed up by another reliable insider in Midori. I am pulling this off Push Square, so credit to them for this. The rumor may suggest we'll see more of the Square Enix title later in 2024 after 2 years of radio silence since its reveal. And that does feel right, because right now we don't know Square's big release for 2025. So this feels like a good timeline, because you had 2023 was for Final Fantasy 16, 24 for Rebirth, 25 for Kingdom Hearts. So do what you will with that information. If you're a Kingdom Hearts fan like I am, hopefully that means we see some kind of resurgence this year about the game. That'd be great. Kingdom Hearts 3 was a very hot selling game, so I'm sure Square is ready to get back on the train of getting a bunch of people to buy that. And Disney themselves were also like, please print more money for us. So, Chris, I know you're not big on Kingdom Hearts, so I don't know how much you want to add into that, but I do want to ask you, I know it's been a while. Have you revisited Kingdom Hearts at all since you kind of had your little weird stint where you were trying to platinum it?
Yeah, I've played a little bit of Kingdom Hearts. It's still a fine game. It's just not something I feel imperative to play right now. It's kind of a more, this would be funny. And that's not, super motivating to actually play the game, that I'm not super duper into. I think it's cool. I want to see how Donald Duck becomes the most powerful user in the Square universe, but we'll see.
You got a lot of games to get there, but you can one day if you just try.
You know what? As Michael Scott said, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take.
Here's the problem, Chris. Every time you have ever told me that you want to start and finish an entire series of games, I just know that inherently means that you will never.
Hey, I've played a decent amount of Final Fantasy.
Yeah.
I finished Remake. That's one of them.
You did. That's one game, Chris.
Yeah. How many Final Fantasies could there possibly be? 4?
At the very least, 16.
No. They would never do that. There's only
What's
4
next?
Final Fantasies.
16-2?
How can you make
3?
How can you make
Final
16,
Fantasy Returns?
How can you make 16 Final Fantasies? None of them were final, so which is the final one, Brett?
Chris, this next piece of news, I think, is something that you and I kind of... it's interesting to hear because it's after kind of a very shaky reveal of the game when they did. Bloober Team says Silent Hill 2 Remake is its most important test, but the studio remains very confident about the final result. So all eyes are on Bloober Team as we inch closer to the developer's PS5 remake of Silent Hill 2, a pressure the studio is well aware of. Again, this is Push Square, so go check out the article if you want to read a little more into it. Expected sometime in 2024 still right now, and despite a public spat with publisher Konami in February, Bloober Team remains remains, quote, very confident about the final result, end quote. The studio recently released its annual report to shareholders, thanks to Eurogamer, where the team expressed optimism about the project, acknowledging that remaking a game as iconic as Silent Hill 2 will, quote, be the most important test, end quote, the studio has ever faced. In 2023, almost half of this is a Bloober quote, by the way. 2023, almost half our production forces were focused on the currently loudest project in the industry, Silent Hill 2. Gas it up, why don't you? Which we are creating together with our partner Konami. It is one of the most recognizable brands in the gaming world, and definitely a key one in which, when it comes to horror genre, we make every effort to provide the best possible emotions, both to those who played the original over 20 years ago and those for whom this will be their first approach to the famous series. So pretty wild for them to say that this is the loudest project in the industry when the other Konami game, Metal Gear Solid 3 Remake, also exists and is also probably still not the loudest project in the industry. I get that Bloober's trying to amp themselves up and they're really trying to push this and push themselves. And I still hope that this game somehow lands. And I continue to say that I actually did not hate, I don't know why I can't think of the damn name of the game, Chris. The Medium. There's redeeming qualities to the Medium.
Agreed.
But Silent Hill has got, or rather Bloober has a lot of work to do while working on something as iconic as Silent Hill to be able to truly impress me and make me think that they have any kind of future making games for this series, first and foremost. Whether or not they even want to continue doing that is a different question. So, Chris, you saw the gameplay. It looked kind of rough. A lot of people thought so. That's where the spat came from in February, where they were saying that this was very old footage, and Konami used very old footage to show the game, and that it did not look that rough, and that was not what you should look at and expect of the game when it finally hits shelves. What do you think of this? Is this just saving face?
No, I mean, I think it's one of those things where it's like, you know, someone has a good game and they go, I'm the best in the league. And they're very clearly just a bench player who broke out one day. You know, To me, this seems like them being like, yeah, this is because unequivocally, this is the most important game they'll ever do. Most likely. It's got to be, right? This is Silent Hill 2. So this is the most important game they'll ever do. And outside of probably like 4 studios, it's probably the most important game anyone would ever do, given the history that Silent Hill has in this industry. You know, so I mean, I think that they're trying to sell their game, so they're trying to hype you up. But me looking at the gameplay they revealed, I didn't think it looked great. Maybe the game plays differently and all that action. There's not as much as it seems like, and all this kind of stuff. I'm willing to see it out, but I certainly wasn't willing to keep it on my Metacritic draft. So that's my level of confidence in them.
Can't blame you. Next thing we're going to talk about real quick is Lost Soul Aside, a game you've probably heard me talk about for years, even before Chris joined the show. Has an age rating, which may hint at more news soon, maybe in the next quarter. So once again on Push Square, says the long-awaited Lost Soul Aside out of Sony's own China Hero project could be nearing the development finish line, as the PS5, PS4 title has been handed a Chinese age rating, clearing it for release in the country. Daniel Lamont, an analyst at Nico Partners, who knows, adds this likely means news surrounding the game's final release will likely be shared soon, potentially within the next 3 months, which is pretty huge because this game was revealed 7 years ago, and I remember when it came out. It was a single developer working on this as an Unreal side game, and then Sony took interest, built up a studio to help him make this game a reality. And we've seen other games come and emerge from Sony's China Hero project, like Anno Mutatum, Fist, the Forge and Shadow Torch. It's a Metroidvania style game, which was pretty damn good. I liked both of those. I'm ready to see this one kind of come to fruition. Chris, have you seen anything on this game? Because if you haven't, it looks really fucking cool. But the problem with that is, going back to what Rude Day said, how do I know any of it's real?
Buddy, how do we know any of this is real?
Damn, Chris. Deep thought. No, look, I think that this would be cool. If this does end up coming out this year, Sony gets another cool Japanese game to add to their roster for this year to kind of set apart from Stellar Blade. So if Stellar Blade is the April game, maybe we'll see this be the July, August game, which would be pretty sick. I'd be happy to see that. I think that they would want to be careful not to release this game in too crowded of an area. So I don't think this makes sense to be like a holiday window release. But who am I to say?
Who knows, man?
I think Stellar Blade has an excellent release window from a sheer ability to just actually hit the market and people be in a spot to where they could have interest and maybe pick it up. Stellar Blade chose a really good window. So maybe they'll get that here. One more thing, Chris, this affects both of us, definitely affects me since I'm pretty sure this is on my Metacritic draft. The Wolf Among Us 2 surfaces once more offering screenshots, and this is once more over on Push Square. They say The Wolf Among Us 2 is eagerly anticipated sequel to the one of Telltale's most beloved games, but news of the endeavor has been surprisingly scarce. Last we heard, the game had been delayed and would not be released in 2023 as we originally hoped for. Thankfully, a familiar face has kept the flame of hope alive. The Game Awards' own Jeff Keighley recently surfaced some screenshots of the still in production project, giving us glimpses of the big bad wolf himself, who still seems down on his luck. When we finally get our grasping paws on this one, it remains anyone's guess, but rest assured it's still on the way. And the screenshots are pretty cool. You should go check them out if you haven't seen them. It's actually kind of nice seeing Bigby in a slightly more modern art style, because the thing about the original game, it was very much built around the very limited PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and even working on something like the Vita. It doesn't look like they're just drastically changing the art style, which I think is the right call, definitely for a company that quite literally went under when this game first started being made. Here's the thing, replaying last year, the first one, they could release the game with the same art style and I don't give a shit. That's my point. So do what you will with that information. But Chris, are you excited to see these? Have you seen the screenshots yet?
No, I haven't seen them yet. I actually didn't know there was news on it, so I'll have to take a look. But I'm excited for The Wolf Among Us 2. I'm a big fan of that game.
Yeah, I will be very gutted if somehow this still doesn't make it out. But here's the hope, and that doesn't end up being the case. The biggest thing I can tell you is that the art style looks the same, and it really still heavily uses the thick black lines that they used in the original. The big thing is polygon count is up. So certain characters just have much rounder heads than they would have in the original game. But
yeah,
still, it looks like the game in a way that doesn't feel like a drastic departure. And that's good because I quite enjoy that game. It's very good.
Hell yeah.
All right. That was the last piece of news we really had. I'm sure there might be something that we missed, but it's not a crazy week as far as news goes. So what we're going to round out the show with is a question, or maybe a couple questions. I want to dig back in and make sure I'm finding them correctly. This one I really like because, so we're going to do two of them. Excuse me. The first one comes from RMG 0731, and he goes, "It appears Alan Wake 2 has not made profits as of yet. I'm still of the mindset that having a physical release would have greatly improved their sales, but what say you?" Chris, we've long had conversations about physical versus digital and what having both market options looks like. We even had a little discussion around Alan Wake 2 when it was announced that it was going to be fully digital. Mm-hmm. As someone who is primarily digital, do you think you could strongman an argument for how physical would actually help this game, or do you think that you can't even really see the value enough to be able to make that argument, even if it's not one that you actually agree with?
I think I could definitely make the argument. I wouldn't believe it, because here's the thing, in my opinion right now, is that if this game didn't make profit without having to manufacture digital or physical boxes and copies of this game, that's not a negligible cost.
Yeah,
this game
definitely
wouldn't have made profit if it added that cost. I can't see that. I don't. Do you really think there's an audience big enough to supplant that cost and push Alan Wake 2 over the edge?
You know, I'm going to play devil's advocate here in a very specific way. So hear me out. I think that I do agree, and I even understand, and I did have the thought process that if your game's not already making money. And the important part of the question is, would having one, and I think that there's a very strong implication here that would having one day one have helped? I think there's a really strong argument that doing one now would not inherently entail turning a profit suddenly, because now you're adding cost onto something that hasn't already hit, and now you're adding more money that you need to overcome. Whereas if you did that up front, you at least have had that same expectation this whole time. But where I do want to play devil's advocate here, to your last point, is there an audience big enough to make this work? I'm not saying that this is a for sure, but this feels like where you partner with someone whose whole shtick is making physical versions of games that are normally digital, like limited run games, even though I have problems with plenty of the ways that they have operated, trust me. But there are other publishers who do the same thing, and really leaning into this being a collector's item, to where you pull in the physical version of the game, you pull in all these weird collectibles, and Alan Wake is rife with imagery that you can use to pull in collectibles. You can pull in physical pieces of paper of the story, the what do they call them in the game? I can't think of it right now. But the bits of story that you can find that have got the redacted lines and whatnot.
Oh, the manuscript. Audio logs or manuscripts.
Manuscripts, yeah. So I think you could include something like that. You could include some of the imagery. You could probably do something crazy like some of the objects of power that they're using, like a physical version of the Switch, and play into it. You could do all sorts of imagery for this. And I think that you could make a physical version of this game that you sell for 100, 120, who knows. I think you might. But I at this point, I think that's the only way. I think if you try and come out now and just do a normal physical release, I don't think it's going to drum up enough interest. But I think if you look to people who specifically want a collector's experience and are willing to pay a premium for that, then you can pack it full of things that don't cost very much to produce. And what's great is you partner with them, right? You partner with Limited Run, and Limited Run takes on the cost of doing all these things. All you're doing is essentially paying them, saying, this is what we're going to pay you. Do what you want to with it. And I think that'd be an interesting thing to see, because there is a big culture around that. And I know that because I bought the fucking Dead Space Limited Run games thing that came with Isaac Clarke's helmet, because it's fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
So
I see your point. I just think you're making a different argument.
I think that's fair. I am changing the definition around the argument for sure. I'm specifying the physical release at this point.
Because that sure, like totally. I'd still argue that is the juice worth the squeeze? Again, it still hasn't made profit without that cost. So like, I think you're right. I think that would sell. I'd buy that. But I don't think that's the same argument as would this game have been profitable if it had printed physical releases? Because I think the argument is unequivocally no. And that's it, because without that cost, the game still sold well enough for Remedy to be happy, but didn't make a profit. So
let me ask you a sub question that is kind of playing into this, because one of the things about physical items that I think comes into play for me, that's why I want to ask you as someone who's a little bit more, and I know this because you do it during sales, but not necessarily in the same way. So my story about walking through Walmart, seeing the last Xbox Series X when Xbox Series X were still very hard to find, on the same day that I was thinking it'd be cool to play Oblivion again, so I impulse bought a $500 machine to play Oblivion, and I had a blast doing that. Okay. I am pretty good at impulse buying, and so if I see something around, there's a chance I'll buy it physically. There's a chance I buy it. But that only happens in a store setting for me. I don't really impulse buy or even feel the impulse to buy things that are happening on a digital level. Do you feel like that the same experience that I'm talking about having in a store, do you get that in a digital sense when you just browse the digital storefront? Because I think the argument for me is the reason I don't get that is I am never going to the PlayStation Store unless I'm already knowing what I'm going there to buy. I don't ever peruse the PlayStation Store. And since they make it easy to immediately search the game I want without ever looking at the store otherwise, I don't interact with the store enough to even catch an impulse to buy anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder what you would say if you looked in one of those sales. Because I think for me, I don't necessarily have it's a weird thing, right? The story of like me buying Dead Island 2 was I was bored with what I was playing, and I was looking in the store to see what was in the sale. Maybe something piqued my interest and it was cheap, So for me, if I'm going in there, it's 99% of the time like it's a curiosity on what's on sale, because sometimes like I will just see like, oh shit, this AAA game is $5. Let me buy it. Even if I don't intend to play it, because hey, what am I going to do with $5 that's, any more valuable than this $5 game? So I don't know that I get the same impulse buys, but like buying Dead Island 2, it was because I went into the sale and I was like, fuck it, it's cheap enough.
Yeah, I think it's just what are your habits going into it? Because I can kind of see where the argument would be made that people who impulse buy based off of physically walking by something might have bought the game, but is that really enough to turn profit? To make something non-profitable into a profitable item? And I think that's probably a hard argument. So I think we're going to wrap that one up, and we're going to end the show with an interesting one real quick, where it comes from Josh Ayers, longtime listener, longtime patron. He's been with us for quite literally almost all of the 350 episodes. So with that in mind, this is a question for me, but I do kind of want to hear Chris's thoughts on how this came about. Because I didn't see the whole conversation, but on Discord the other day, I did see Chris post exactly what the question here. He says, for Brett, Chris, I know your feelings. Is Sony not capitalizing on Days Gone as big a loss as Sony not capitalizing on Demon Souls? And I saw that you posted that. So before I even give my answer, may I ask what drove you to post that and what was the inspiration?
Yeah, someone posted a GIF of Days Gone.
So I can very easily see this being just a little bit of exaggeration because you quite literally love Days Gone.
Yeah,
as do I.
Exaggeration, but also
so.
Not.
If you were going to try and qualify where you think, it seems like an exaggeration with an egg of truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I guess
there's a little kernel of truth in there.
I think it's more truth than exaggeration, but yeah.
Okay, well, that's what I'm trying to figure out. What I'm getting at is, obviously, it's a bold claim, Chris.
Sure.
Throw that out there. Because the argument goes that Sony passing on continuing forward with Demon Souls leads directly to a future where Sony is not the publisher behind Elden Ring, which sold over 40 million copies in a year.
Yeah.
So how is your claim building to this point, even if you are aware that there's quite a bit of exaggeration? Are you positing that there's a very clear future in where Days Gone eventually becomes a tens of millions selling game? Like single game?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm looking one thing up, but...
Are you looking up current sales for the game?
Not that game.
Are you looking up sales for Demon Souls originally?
Yeah. Days Gone sold 7.3 and Demon Souls sold 1.4. So...
Yeah. Demon Souls was also made on a shoestring budget.
I don't give a shit about that, though. It's 1.4 million copies became a game that is now a phenomenon. Obviously, it's an exaggeration to assume that a game about a biker fighting zombies would become that big, but it's not that crazy to think that investing in a game with that technology and that level of fun and that level of polish could have blown up into something bigger. I'm not saying that Elden Ring would be 40 million, but are you getting Elden Ring if Sony goes, damn, Demon Souls was successful, let's buy From?
Maybe not. And then, that is very much a cause and effect thing. You may not have ever gotten to the point where that game could be made. Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know. Obviously, I think that would be a bad argument for me to make my point, because they only made Demon Souls because they couldn't make they only made Dark Souls because they couldn't make Demon Souls anymore because they're the same game.
Yeah,
for all intents and purposes. Yeah. So probably, the trajectory for Sony would be a lot brighter. But I think something that showed as much promise, and especially the response to it after launch, of people being like, holy shit, this is good. Holy shit, the Horde stuff is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I think that...
Man, I think it's a really similar path on both games, though, right? Because a lot of the reason that Sony fumbled the bag with Demon Souls is because when they chose to come in behind FromSoft and choose to pick it up from a publishing side in Japan, and put their money into it and whatnot, the game didn't really blow up in Japan in the time period, and that was back when gaming still had to be localized in a way where you didn't see games come out over here, overseas as quickly. And so there was about a year's worth of time between bringing the game overseas. And Sony basically decided that since the game didn't do well enough in Japan, they saw no reason to do exactly what you argued against with Alan Wake 2. They saw no reason to incur more cost for a game that may not become profitable if they were to do so, right? So they passed on the rights for publishing to Atlas. Mm-hmm. Atlas picked the game up, released it in North America, and some alchemy happened where when it released over here in North America, it blew the fuck up. And I remember because I remember seeing the trailer for Demon Souls and being like, this looks incredible. What the fuck? And then buying Demon Souls and me and my friend being like, fuck, this is hard. Also, this is amazing and very cool. And that just kind of spread like wildfire, and suddenly you have a huge success. And I argue that the same thing kind of happened because Demon Souls is a kind of broken game. There's parts of the game that aren't very polished and don't look great and don't function super great. And this is the same story that I think happened with Days Gone, because the problem with Days Gone is that they released it in a state where it was buggy.
Well, yeah,
and the problem with it being that buggy is that the reviews started off on the wrong foot, which just led people down a path of not wanting to take the risk to go into it. And so even though the game, even now, right, the game is very much, lauded and celebrated to this day, 4 years later, because people just love it. And they're like, oh, it's so cool. There's a lot of cool ideas. Look, I'm playing this very good version of the game where there's no bugs. The game is very graphically impressive. The horde mode stuff does work really well and is really tense. And I've hardly ever felt that in any other game, even games that say to be built around the idea of zombie hordes like Dead Island. And so you start to get this thing going up where it's another example of a game being appreciated past its prime.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if I want to say that Sony fumbled the bag necessarily, but I think that there's always a window in where a company's like, if we're not seeing a return within a certain amount of time, we've got to cut our losses. Sony does have a really weird history of doing that, seemingly a little too early. But yeah. I think that if Days Gone would have set the world on fire whenever it released on PC, and I think that they did take a chance in being like, we're gonna throw it on PC. It won't cost that much. It's almost no way we're gonna lose money. I think if that game hit PC and suddenly sold 10 million on PC, different story. I think Sony would actively be like, okay, maybe we do need to look at Days Gone 2.
Yeah, but
maybe we just released in a weird window.
Didn't the second one get canceled before the PC version? Because Garvin and the other guy were gone when that was coming out.
They were gone immediately when it shipped.
So that it's not... Days Gone 2 was not a thought because that's why they left. They've talked about it. They left because they couldn't make that game. So,
well, no, Garvin was leaving anyway. He's actually spoke a lot about that. And I think Jake left, Jake Rocket, so whatever that dude's actually, that's his Twitter handle. I think he left specifically because Garvin was leaving, and they're kind of, they were like, if we're going to make more, we're going to do it together. I don't know exactly when it got canceled. I don't want to speak too hard, but I know that Garvin said that Sony was trying to push him out as soon as the game shipped. Like they were just like, because apparently he's slightly hard to work for. Look, and he said that himself. So
I think regardless of anything, obviously there's a bit of, what do you think? Because he doesn't want my opinion. He wants yours. What's your take?
Yeah. Look, I'm going to go as far as to saying that I think that much like you said, there's a nugget of truth in the exaggeration there. I don't know that I see it quite as strongly as you do. I think that I see from a game standpoint of not realizing they had a really great game, I think it could be there. But I think one of the really interesting things about Demon Souls is that Demon Souls was a really cheap game to make, even with Sony coming in and putting a little bit of money into it. And so when they FromSoft decided to go to a completely different publisher and go, hey, Bandai, will y'all publish our game for, not that much money? It's a pretty cheap game to make. And then Bandai says, yeah, I think it ends up becoming this thing where there was never a version, and definitely looking at now, I don't think Sony would have made Dark Souls anyway. even if they kept working with FromSoft after Demon's Souls, I think there would have been we got to scale it up. We've got to go higher budget. We've got to try and push this so that it can become the next big thing. And the thing about Dark Souls is that Dark Souls became the next big thing in spite of not being AAA insane production values. It became the next big thing because of the fact that it was made on a budget and was able to take risk because of its budget. Companies like Sony have a really hard time allowing companies to make risky moves. But it's funny because I do think that the way that we saw Demon's Souls eventually spider out into one of the most successful subgenres of all time is a good example of why I wish Sony would return to their original idea of not letting the first game of any series determine its value, and at least being like, if it got close enough, let's give it a second try and see if the second game can really knock it out of the park. Because I think Uncharted 2 did that. Mm-hmm. And Uncharted 1 was successful and it made a profit, but Uncharted didn't become the juggernaut series that it really was until Uncharted 2.
Yeah, Uncharted sold 4.8 million copies. So less than Days Gone.
Yeah. Now, different budget, different time period. Who knows what they actually do that as, but your point stands all the same. Days Gone made enough money and seemingly made enough of its budget back that there was no reason not to try again. If the game, and that's why I think, honestly, if everything about Days Gone still happened the exact same way, but the reviews didn't get hit because of the bugginess, I think if we saw Days Gone hit at an 85, I think there's a very different story. But since Days Gone hit in the 70s and was really buggy and kind of gave a little bit of controversy, I think Sony was just kind of like, yeah, we don't want to bother. So no, I don't think it's really. I don't think it's as big of a loss as Demon's Souls, but I do want to be. I want to be clear. I do think losing Days Gone and not allowing them to try and amp up this idea one more time is a loss. I also think that that's true of the Order 1886. I think with a little bit of direction, little bit of specific direction in trying to look at the qualms that people had, I think that enough people do like the characters and the story of that you can fix the other things and you can get a really big game. But you have to be willing to take risk in that, and a lot of people aren't, so.
Yeah.
So that's how it goes. So, yeah, I think that's the last question for the episode. So this may not have been a super exciting 350. I'm sorry that Saul didn't get to come back. I know a lot of you were excited. We had a lot of questions coming around for him. So hopefully you guys get to see him soon. I will see if he wants to reschedule and be on soon if he can. But of course, if you remember, this is part of why he left the show, is having other responsibilities that he had a duty towards. So take that with what you will. Chris, thank you for joining me these last almost 100 episodes at this point, if I'm not mistaken.
Be close to 100, yeah.
Yeah. So, you're coming in on like your second year of doing this all the way through.
Oh, shit. Yeah, that's true.
So, so I appreciate you for being here. Thank you. I'm glad the show still gets to go on because of that. We'll see how long we can keep this train going. But for now, we got other projects that might pull our attention every now and then. Look, guys, I'll go ahead and give a slightly more update. John, if you're listening at this point, your idea for Tabletop Simulator, while frustrating in terms of me having to actually do the coding and stuff to get it up in that game,
it's work.
I do have a functional enough version of the card game in there that Chris and I can playtest it. And by playtesting it, I think a lot of our differences and what we thought were differences were a lot closer on than we thought, because we're actually finally able to put card to table, even if virtually, and show what we were talking about. So good idea. Chris and I have I think it's good because, Chris, I can kind of tell since we've even started, even the first game when you were playing it the way I was looking at, I just kind of could tell there was like a new, almost like a reviving of the spirit where it's like, oh, hell yeah, cool. Now that I'm seeing it in action, I'm getting a second wind of inspiration, and I'm just wanting to,
It was funny because there were points where you would say something and I would be like, it would immediately make me go like, yeah, I was fucking right. Or no, I was fucking wrong. I would have both of those moments. And it was funny because I could tell you could tell, because sometimes you would say something and I would just be like, yeah, all right. And then I would just start playing.
Yeah. So that's been a good thing. I'm glad we have that bridge for us to actually do so now, because I'm be honest, I don't know how we would have done it otherwise. Even trying to send you cards and fucking around with webcams, this feels better than that to me.
It does. I agree.
And if we're being real, I'm getting to use a little bit of my coding flexing here. And so I am proud of the fact that I was able to throw together a semi-functional version of our game enough to where we can play test it. Though it's also funny because, Chris, I say this with all the love in the world, but my favorite thing when people who have no idea about coding is when they start trying to give you tips for coding while having no basis of knowledge of how you do it. Because it's really interesting to see where your ideas stem from, because without having any knowledge of coding, it feels so intuitive to be like, well, what if you just tried this instead? But you're so out of your element that you give me you try and throw an idea out there, and I'm like, oh, you poor, sweet, innocent child who knows nothing about this world.
Yeah,
with all the enthusiasm in the world, Chris as soon as I kind of showed Chris that I had a somewhat working version of the game on there, as soon as I sent him a video clip of the cards kind of coming out and interacting and doing these things, Chris almost immediately goes, hey, bro, hold on. How commercially viable would it be to do this? And I'm like, okay, Chris, take a step back.
Well, it was a genuine question because like it was one of those things where I'm sitting there and I'm like, if he's going to spend, because I know you well enough to know that you're probably going to spend like 200 hours of your life coding this because you're not going to be satisfied until it works.
Yeah, so, I'm not satisfied right now with it. I'm satisfied in the fact that I can play it with you, but I am not satisfied with its actual functionality as much as we can still play it.
So I'm looking at it and I'm like, well, it's worked so far. Can you bust this out and make it playable for everybody?
At that point, if we're making this a video game, now I'm going to start being like, well, now we're making a video game. All these other crazy ideas you've had that work more in a video game space, we want to revisit. And now we're just losing the forest for the trees, you know?
We'll put HP back in the game.
All right, guys. With that being said, if you want to join the people who went over to patreon.com/Nartech and gave as little as $1 per month to support the show, like so many of you have, Josh Ayers, No Fate, a lot of you showed up and asked, Jehudi, a lot of you asked questions this episode and came out for us, and we were very appreciative of that. So if you want to join those people and help us keep this show afloat without us having to dig in our own pockets, we'd be ever so grateful. Like I said, patreon.com/Nartech, as little as $1 per month. And what we do, while we still have a reasonable number of patrons, we shout out each and every one of them as a way to thank them for allowing us to continue doing this. So without further ado, our first shout out is Duh Overlord, Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Matt Tubbs, Easton328, Aztec King, Lecheon69, The Lord Corgi, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Cypher Primus, Kyle Grimm, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villalobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Donovan Williams, Matthew Green, and Sean Santarud. Thanks to each and every one of you. We see you next week.